Chapter 46. The Prowess of a True Thief. Nie Yan, are you really sure we can do it? Yao Yao said, gently nudging Nie Yan with her arm. The expression in her eyes was filled with worry. Rest assured, there won't be any problems. Yao Yao's actions couldn't be considered excessively intimate. However, Chen Bo thought otherwise. He believed Nie Yan was stepping out of line by being too overly close with Yao Yao. As a consequence, the resentment and hatred in his eyes only grew all the more extreme as he covertly gazed at the two. The team of 20 slowly advanced deeper into the forest. The warriors and paladins were on the front line, and the mages were in the back. Under Nie Yan's repeated warnings, no players were more than 2 meters apart from each other. Brother Chen, how about you come in front and scout the path ahead?
Nie Yan suggested.
The corner of his eyes flashed with a cold, peculiar light. Chen Bo had a hypocritical and petty personality. Therefore, he would firmly hold onto a grudge if even the slightest enmity occurred between the two of them. By making him lose face, Nie Yan had already thoroughly offended him. Despite this, Nie Yan wasn't the slightest bit fearful. Chen Bo, you're just a useless brat who's barely capable of the simplest tasks. Do you really think you can stir up any trouble with me leading the team? You're a thief too. Why the hell are you making me go?
Chen Bo coldly replied.
I'm the team captain, so I have to lead the team. Would you rather have me scout ahead and have you lead the entire team instead, Brother Chen Bo?
Nie Yan countered.
No need. I want to see how exactly you plan to lead us through this dungeon on specialist difficulty. Chen Bo coldly snorted and walked to the front of the team. Utilizing his class's nimbleness, he then began scouting the path ahead. From Chen Bo's movements, Nie Yan could tell he was barely decent for an average thief. If Chen Bo ever tried to compare with him, he would find that Nie Yan was of an entirely different caliber. A cold breeze from the depths of the forest occasionally blew past, leaving the team with a strange sensation, almost as if they were being watched by some other entity. Nie Yan's mind was on constant alert. With his keen sense, he caught glimpses of shadows hiding in the distance. They were dark elves, experts of camouflage and hiding in the darkness to mount ambushes. They were impossible to perceive unless the player had an awareness of above 10. Chen Bo moved forward and began scouting ahead for the rest of the team. On either side were thick branches with lush foliage which blocked his path. Beneath his feet were jungle vines and tree roots which resembled thick serpents as they lay strewn across the path ahead. They were tripping hazards and made advancing forward quite difficult. Ugh! Damn these things to hell! Chen Bo tried kicking away one of the vines lying on the path. However, it seemed to have a mind of its own. As if it were an actual snake, the vine coiled around his legs, whipped upwards, and left him dangling in midair with his head facing the ground. Save me!
Chen Bo miserably shrieked.
The towering tree beside him suddenly came alive, whereupon vines stretched as far as the eye could see. Chen Bo saw the tree grow a pair of eyes, a nose, and a mouth. Even the vines surrounding the trunk grew into what seemed like a beard. Chen Bo had been caught off guard by a tray ant. It's a tray ant! By Kai Shu A, plain boiled water. Dumpling, attack from the right. Paladins, form a wall. Mages, start casting spells. Nie Yan calmly ordered. He had actually noticed the tray ant in disguise earlier when Chen Bo was scouting the area. However, he intentionally chose not to warn Chen Bo in order to give him a good lesson. You impolite brat, I'll have this tray ant teach you in my place. Dumpling rushed forward from the right side as he held a wooden shield in his hand. Shield bash! Bang! A loud sound echoed out as the wooden shield collided with the tray ant. The crowd of frontliners firmly stood in place, surrounding the monster, while the mages in the back fired off volley after volley of spells. A shower of magic flew up into the air and went streaking towards the tray ant. Boom! 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 Several explosions rang out in quick succession as they bombarded their target. The tray ant issued a painful roar whereupon it transformed into a lump of wood debris that lay collapsed on the ground. The one they encountered was merely an ordinary mob. Therefore, it was impossible for the tray ant to withstand such a concentrated assault. The vine's grip on Chen Bo loosened and he was sent hurtling towards the ground. Thud! He fell flat on his face. Seeing his sorry figure, everyone on the team couldn't help but laugh. What did it drop? 3 coppers. Chen Bo felt embarrassed. He cast an angry gaze at Nie Yan and said, "You did that intentionally, didn't you?" He knew Nie Yan noticed the tray ant earlier but still chose not to warn him. Otherwise, how could Nie Yan have reacted so calmly in such a sudden and urgent situation? Brother Morningwood, you'll have to speak a bit more clearly. I'm finding your reasoning a little strange. It was you who wasn't careful and ended up getting caught by the tray ant. What does that have to do with me? Nie Yan gave a barely discernible smile as he gazed at Chen Bo, his expression telling otherwise. I did notice the tray ant earlier, and I did intentionally not warn you. What can you do about it? You dash. Chen Bo, stop causing trouble, Yulan interrupted. She was also unclear about whether Nie Yan had noticed the tray ant earlier or not. Pah! I guess it's just my bad luck. Chen Bo spit out some of the dirt in his mouth. He turned around and continued moving forward. Brother Morningwood, take care of what you step on. When Nie Yan spoke, he deliberately slowed down his speech as he watched Chen Bo accidentally step on a trap. The moment Chen Bo turned around to look at Nie Yan, a large wooden beam came swinging over and struck him in the stomach. Chen Bo was sent flying into the air. Thud. He once again fell flat on his face. Fortunately for him, thieves had higher reflex compared to other classes. Therefore, even if they stepped on a trap, they'd receive much less damage compared to other classes. Despite this, the trap had still taken more than half of Chen Bo's health away. To add insult to injury, Nie Yan continued to taunt him. I did tell you to be careful, yet unfortunately, you still didn't listen to me. You're playing the thief class. Don't tell me you don't know how to avoid traps. I really don't know how you could act as the team's thief. A good thief can increase a team's survival rate by over 50%, but with a thief like you, never mind. Forget it. I won't say any more. I don't want to hurt your pride or anything. It was already bad enough that he had fallen for another trap. However, when Nie Yan deliberately taunted him in such a manner, Chen Bo looked as if he could spit fire as he stared daggers at Nie Yan. Nie Yan didn't care in the least how Chen Bo stared at him. He wasn't some sort of kind and benevolent person. As soon as he entered their team, Chen Bo had always been mocking and ridiculing him. If he still continued to tolerate such behavior without acting, his name wouldn't be Nie Yan. Why are you still trying to show off if you're so unskilled? You got yourself in such a sorry state, and you're still trying to blame others. Tang Yao added in a mocking and drawn-out tone. Your equipment's wasted on you. We'd probably find a better thief than you by randomly pulling one off the streets. Dusk also joined in while standing by Nie Yan's side. Chen Bo's current reputation within the team wasn't great. At the moment, no one was willing to speak out and help him. Nie Yan, you really didn't notice earlier? Yao Yao's beautiful face was full of doubt. Chen Bo stepping into another trap right after being caught by the tray ant did seem like more than just a coincidence. However, when she looked back on those incidents, it still seemed that it was his own fault for being inattentive. What does his carelessness have to do with me?
Nie Yan innocently replied.
You're just full of evil tricks, aren't you? No one can tell whether you purposefully baited him into those traps or not. Yao Yao teasingly whispered into Nie Yan's ear. The faint fragrance of her perfume paired with her soft and gentle voice left him feeling slightly refreshed. If I were Captain Yulan, I wouldn't be so lenient in keeping such an unskilled thief. I bet if I were to meet 100 thieves, 99 of them wouldn't be as weak as you. Do you want me to teach you how to play this class? The provocative tone in Nie Yan's words was even clearer. If the opposite party was determined to make an enemy out of him, he'd make sure to give them a few more kicks when he had them beneath his feet. Such was Nie Yan's true character. Nie Yan played with his dagger. His fingers were nimble as it twirled around his hand. My teammate lacks ability. Please just see this incident as nothing more than a joke. Chen Bo stepping in those traps while scouting ahead was due to his own carelessness. As the team captain, Yulan also felt embarrassed when Chen Bo was ridiculed like so. Therefore she helped speak in his place. I guess it's up to me then. It seems this task is something Brother Morningwood is unable to accomplish, Nie Yan announced. Since Yulan had spoken, it wouldn't be quite appropriate for him to continue taunting Chen Bo. Besides, the only person he couldn't bear was Chen Bo. He could get along fine with everyone else in Yulan's team. I'll have to trouble Brother Nie then, Yulan replied. The change in topic eased the tension in the atmosphere. Nie Yan rapidly inspected for traps as he scouted the path ahead. His eyes swept through the entire forest, and he was extremely attentive as he examined every area where traps could potentially be placed. He noticed a peculiarly placed branch lying across the path ahead, and instantly knew what it was upon examining it. He extended his hand and lightly tapped the branch before quickly taking a few steps back. Whoosh! 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 Several dozen arrows were set flying across his previous position. Put. A short moment later, all of the arrows could be seen embedded in a nearby tree. He had long since ducked out of their path, so these arrows were unable to harm him in any way. Nie Yan disarmed trap after trap as they traveled deeper into the forest. Yulan, Yao Yao, and Dusk could only see his figure continuously traveling back and forth between the trees. They were inwardly frightened by his astonishing efficiency in discovering and disarming traps. During this whole time, their team had never once stepped into another trap. Disarming traps was a thief's responsibility because of the unique characteristics of the class. Moreover, the class also gained an additional bonus in the reflex stat, which allowed them to have a 50% higher survival rate compared to other classes. Since Chen Bo was a thief as well, he felt if he stayed idle with the rest of the team, he'd be losing too much face when compared to Nie Yan. With no other choice, he forced himself to look busy and traveled through the forest while pretending to look for traps. Only now did he realize the disparity between himself and Nie Yan. However, he was unwilling to admit it due to his pride. He inwardly sneered and muttered sourly, "He's only good at playing a video game. What's so amazing about that?" Chapter 47. Not all men are created equal. There were hidden dangers lurking everywhere within the forest, such as the traps regularly encountered along the pathway. Chen Bo himself had narrowly escaped death by barely avoiding a fall into a spike pit. Fortunately, he was attentive enough to notice the pit before stepping in. Otherwise, he would have embarrassed himself further by dying to such a simple trap. After that incident, he changed his mind. He no longer went searching for traps along unexplored paths. Instead, he switched to areas Nie Yan had already scoured through and made himself look preoccupied, by pretending to search for any traps Nie Yan may have overlooked. Even after 10 minutes, no further mishaps occurred to Chen Bo, not because he was more attentive, but because every trap had already been disarmed in the areas he passed through. Chen Bo pretended to examine a nearby area while he made his way over to a small clearing just ahead since he had just seen Nie Yan walk through it. As he arrived at the center of the clearing, he noticed the ground beneath his feet was a little soft. However, he paid it no heed and negligently strode forward. Crash! The ground trembled and a giant hole opened up underneath him, whereupon he fell into a pit of sludge. Chen Bo's entire body was covered in filth. Moreover, since this filth was a mix of toxic sludge and mud, he was inflicted with the poison status which caused him to lose 2 health per second. With a disgruntled expression, he raised his head to gauge how far of a distance he had fallen. The dirt walls surrounding him were roughly 3 meters in height. Since this pitfall was so deep, climbing out would require him to expend quite a bit of effort. Having walked over to the pitfall, Nie Yan stuck his head over the hole and said, "Ah? Brother Chen Bo, how did you manage to fall into another trap? Didn't I warn you earlier? As a thief, you must always be wary of your surroundings. How could you just stride forward and step right into one again? You bastard! I clearly saw you walking past this area without any problems. You intentionally set me up."
Chen Bo angrily cursed.
He might be an idiot, but he still managed to figure out what had happened. "You stepped in there yourself. I never pushed you in, so how is it my fault? You were simply careless, that's all. I also have another piece of advice for you. Just because I passed through an area safely, it doesn't mean you will as well. Not all men are created equal." Nie Yan gazed at Chen Bo disdainfully before shaking his head. "You're too useless. Even before he reincarnated into the past, Nie Yan had long understood what type of personality Chen Bo possessed. Petty, vindictive, and unable to tolerate any kind of offense. If he held a grudge toward someone, he would simply carry out that grudge to the bitter end. Since this was the case, whatever schemes he had planned in his head, Nie Yan was ready to receive them all. Nie Yan, you son of a bitch, I'll remember this. F***ck your ancestors down to the 18th generation. I'll kick your ass if you've got the guts to fight me. Chen Bo was foaming at the mouth with anger. You'd be useless in that aspect as well. Maybe you should bring a few people with you too. Otherwise, it'd be too boring. Nie Yan was unfazed by Chen Bo's outburst. He turned around and called out to Dumpling and his group. Come pull him up. We still need to continue the run. As dusk, Tang Yao, and the others glanced over, they felt Nie Yan had tormented Chen Bo into quite a miserable state. System. Player Chen Bo has withdrawn from the team. Chen Bo felt too embarrassed to stay any longer, so he gave himself an out by leaving the team. Good. Since that annoying fellow has left, let's continue with the run. We're better off without him anyway. Nie Yan felt Chen Bo acted rather tactful by leaving when he knew he was unwelcome. Aren't you going a little too far? Yulan said while knitting her brows. Although she somewhat loathed Chen Bo as well, he was still a member of her team. She felt rather displeased when Nie Yan drove him away. You all saw what happened earlier as well. I wasn't the one who had him foolishly walk into a slumbering tray ant, nor was I the one who made him carelessly walk into traps. His actions were his own, and their consequences were due to his incompetence. I barely said more than a few sentences to him before he quit in a fit of anger. You really can't blame those things on me, can you? Nie Yan turned to face Yao Yao and innocently asked, Am I in the wrong here? Seeing Nie Yan's appearance, Yao Yao was already on the verge of bursting into laughter. This guy had already got what he wanted, but he still wanted to act as if he was being wronged. Big sister, Chen Bo's attitude earlier was quite bad as well. Even if Nie Yan was a little excessive, all of the mishaps that occurred during this run really was due to Chen Bo's own carelessness. Besides, he shouldn't have been shirking off his own duties and pushing them onto Nie Yan. Yao Yao didn't have a favorable impression of Chen Bo either. Therefore, she spoke on Nie Yan's behalf as soon as she opened her mouth. Never mind. Let's focus on the dungeon run first. We'll discuss this after the run, Yulan said, shaking her head. In any case, my cooperation with your team ends after this run. As long as Chen Bo remains on your team, even if you invite me to another run, I won't come. As they say, what the eye doesn't see, the heart won't grieve over. Since these circumstances will never occur again, you no longer have a reason to get upset further. It will have nothing to do with your team even if he comes to me looking for trouble in the future, Nie Yan added. Were it not for Yao Yao's invitation, he would have never considered running a dungeon with Yulan's team. Chen Bo was too much of an eyesore, so what if he drove him away? Even Buddha could be angered to some degree. He'd have been a weakling with no backbone if he let Chen Bo walk all over him like that.
Nie Yan, I'm really sorry.
Yao Yao said apologetically. Nie Yan had suffered because of her invitation. Yao Yao really was too much of a sweetheart. This incident had been Chen Bo's fault, yet she still directed the blame towards herself. It isn't your fault. I'm just that sort of a person. If there's someone I'm not on good terms with, I'll keep looking for trouble. I've already gotten used to being a solo player and staying as one is fine too. If I enter a team, who knows what sort of restrictions they'll put on me. In the future, it'll be fine and dandy to just make my own team if I want to run a dungeon. Nie Yan laughed in a carefree manner. He had played down the incident and skirted around the issue. From Yao Yao's perspective, Nie Yan appeared quite easygoing and unworried. Her impression of him somewhat changed once again. Right. After some time, we'll find our own people to make a team with. Tang Yao enthusiastically added. Nie Yan believed if he were going to invite people to create a team, at the very minimum, the members needed to be super experts if they wanted to join. If you guys make your own team, I'm afraid I can't join you, Yao Yao apologetically said. She was already in a fixed team. Although she loathed Chen Bo, Yulan was in the team as well. She would never betray Yulan to join another person's team, even if it was Nie Yan's. Ha ha! Don't worry. I already know. Alright everyone, let's switch our focus back to the dungeon run. Let's not give Brother Chen Bo something to mock at by getting wiped during the run, Nie Yan smiled and said. Brother Nie, well done, Dusk said with a smile. He felt Nie Yan was quite an interesting person. Deeper within the eerie forest near an opening between the trees, a community of tree ants were sauntering around, blocking the path ahead. Nie Yan drew closer to these enemies and counted their numbers, 18 tree ants in total. They possessed 30% more health than their normal difficulty counterparts and gained noticeable bonuses in stats as well. Furthermore, there was also Bind A crowd control skill and Lash A skill that increased their damage to be wary of. Their team could only handle 3 tree ants at once. Any more, and things could get a little dangerous. If they were unlucky enough to encounter more than 5 at once, they were guaranteed to be wiped. Since the game was still new, most priests still didn't have a healing or resurrection skill. In fact, the main purpose of coming to Tree Ant Forest for most teams was to get a hold of a lesser heal skill book. There's 18 of them up ahead. I want you guys to stay where you are for now, Nie Yan ordered. He examined the terrain of the nearby area and began to formulate a plan. There's no way we can deal with so many tree ants, Yulan said. Frankly, the moment she found out they had entered this dungeon on specialist difficulty, she had already begun feeling a little restless. If they were wiped again, several of their members were going to drop a level, and climbing back to their previous levels would take quite a long time. Don't worry. I'm not stupid enough to have you guys deal with so many of them at once. Nie Yan began gauging their distance. The nearest tree ants were roughly 10 meters away. He raised his head and surveyed the forest canopy. It was quite fortunate that there was a tall tree right next to him, and there was a branch that could support a person. He could get a better vantage point from a higher elevation. As he extended his hand, he shot out a line of webbing from his silk spinner ring, which adhered to the thick branch of the tree above. After making sure the line was secure, he nimbly scaled the tree. What is he going to do? Yao Yao asked puzzledly as she looked to her side at Yulan and the others. Chapter 48. Godly Ability. Brother Nie has impressive perception. He was actually able to find such a good vantage point. Dusk exclaimed in admiration. He was much more knowledgeable compared to Yulan, Blue Feather, Bai Kai Shu A, Plain Boiled Water, and the others. Naturally, this was because he frequently followed his captain, Sleepy Fox, into difficult dungeons. How could he not be knowledgeable regarding dungeon-specific techniques? Hey, tell us. What's he planning to do? Yulan asked. Although she held the position of team captain, she was only the captain of a run-of-the-mill team. Therefore, she and her team weren't proficient in aspects such as dungeoneering. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been wiped out in this dungeon on easy difficulty. When running dungeons, there's always one person assigned a certain designated task. That task is to find a suitable position to attack certain monsters within a large group. Optimally, that person should aggro 1 or 2 monsters over to the team without alerting the other monsters in the group. Using such methods, teams can break down large crowds of mobs into more manageable sizes. Generally, this job is assigned to the thief who uses a crossbow to carry it out. Presumably, you should all know these things by now. Those 18 tree ants just ahead are quite close to each other. The moment one of them is aggroed, many others will follow in tow. This difference in mob density is likely also one of the key differences in running a specialist dungeon. Even the minor obstacles are this difficult to deal with. Earlier, I had surveyed the area but was unable to find a suitable position to start. It wasn't until I saw Brother Nie Yan scale the tree that I realized I was mistaken in my judgment. His current location is the most optimal for luring mobs. If one didn't have exceptional perception, they would be hard-pressed to find such a great spot. If we had such a thief in our team, our survival rate would increase by at least 30% or higher, Dusk explained. He was not in the least bit shy in expressing his praise and admiration for Nie Yan's skills. Yulan remained taciturn. Initially, she believed herself quite capable, for being able to properly manage a team. However, it appeared that notion was simply due to her lack of experience. When Yao Yao gazed at Nie Yan standing at the top of the branch, her eyes shone with a peculiar splendor. Nie Yan's position within her mind had once again been elevated a few steps. Other than her senior sister, Yulan, there was no other person she admired more. However, finding a suitable position is one thing. Actually luring the monsters without attracting the rest of the group is another. The latter is a test of a thief's perception and reaction. If he's even a little off in the timing or hitting of his target, worst-case scenario, he'll aggro the whole group towards us and cause us to be wiped. Even the most elite thieves have lapses in judgment and make mistakes. Dusk gazed at Nie Yan and said in a nervous tone. While standing on top of the branch, Nie Yan sheathed his dagger and wore it on his waist. He promptly retrieved his crossbow from his bag and propped it up on his shoulder. As he observed the Trent's movements through the sight, his forehead dripped with a bead of sweat. The pressure and nervousness in his mind reached its apex. At this moment, the lives of all 19 members of his team would be decided by his hands. As the tension in the atmosphere increased, Nie Yan gradually tuned out the distractions around him until what remained was only the crossbow in his hand and the target through his sight. Even after the seconds ticked into minutes, he patiently awaited his opportunity to strike. Most of these Trey ants stood idle. Occasionally, one or two of them would uproot themselves and roam about. However, they consistently remained within 2 meters of each other. The close proximity put him in an extremely risky situation. A single badly timed shot could cause a chain of aggro that would lead the entire group to his team. Below Nie Yan were 18 other players watching his every movement attentively. Earlier, they had been ignorant of the severity of their situation. It wasn't until Dusk's explanation that they realized their lives were held in Nie Yan's hands. Since this dungeon was a sealed space, they would have nowhere to run to if those Trey ants came lumbering over after discovering their presence. With the crossbow propped on his shoulder, Nie Yan remained motionless atop the tree branch, almost as if he were a statue. Time seemed to have stood still. Through the crossbow sight, Nie Yan's eyes focused on several Trey ants in the distance. Periodically, a gust of wind blew past the trees, causing the leaves to fall and flutter as if they were butterflies. Nie Yan glanced at the fallen leaves floating in the wind. Wind speed, medium. He abruptly pulled the trigger. The crossbow recoiled acutely after the first bolt fired. Before the second bolt flew out, he sharply shifted the crossbow in another direction. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. 3 bolts fired from the crossbow. As these bolts flew through the air, they surprisingly weren't shot out in a single line but in 3 separate directions. We're done for. Brother Nie's hands were unsteady when he fired. Dusk called out in alarm. When firing a crossbow, the user shouldn't be nervous and absolutely shouldn't have shaky hands. Otherwise, a single slip-up could cost the lives of the entire team. No matter what class they were, the shooter must first have a calm and steady mind because a single shot could decide the fate of their comrades. Under this kind of intense mental pressure, even an experienced expert could have a lapse in judgment due to nervousness. Consequently, such a lapse in judgment guaranteed death of the entire team. It seems Brother Nie couldn't handle the pressure. Every member of the team felt their hearts sink upon hearing Dusk's words. Bai Kai Shui, prepare to hold position, 289.288.212. After firing the crossbow, Nie Yan didn't bother watching to see if the 3 bolts were on target. He leapt off the tree branch onto the ground and began running towards the team. Dusk and the rest of the team looked over in the area where the bolts were fired. Put. The first bolt passed in between the Trey ants and struck a tree further in the back, while the second bolt struck a sapling in the west. Despite both bolts missing their supposed targets, the noise from the bolts striking bark alerted the nearby Trey ants, and over 10 of them moved towards the 2 points to investigate the sources of the noise. The remaining bolt struck the Trey ant nearest to the team and alerted a companion as well, whereupon the 2 Trey ants began lumbering over to Nie Yan. These 2 Trey ants quickly separated from their group as they chased Nie Yan from behind. He managed to lure 2 of them without aggroing the others. Holy shit, that was amazing! Dusk exclaimed in surprise. The others might have not clearly seen what had happened, but how could he not? The crossbow in Nie Yan's hand was a type of semi-automatic crossbow that fired in 3-bolt bursts. The 3 bolts were fired in different directions. The first two bolts had drawn most of the tray ants away, while the last bolt drew two tray ants towards the team. He had been mistaken earlier in believing Nie Yan had unsteady hands when firing the crossbow. Rather, it was actually Nie Yan quickly changing directions to fire at different targets. He had only heard about this kind of highly advanced skill in rumors. Even with the same crossbow, if it were another person firing, the outcome would likely be vastly different. Dusk had been secretly recording during this entire run. Although this type of video couldn't be publicly viewed online if it was recorded without the consent of the person in the video, it could still be shared privately with friends. He would definitely show this clip to his captain, Sleepy Fox. A true top-class thief. This method of drawing aggro was an innovation in dungeoneering. If publicly disseminated, it would certainly become textbook among thieves. Two tray ants were nothing difficult. Since Bai Kai Shui had already gotten into position, he easily intercepted one of the incoming tray ants while Nie Yan used concussive blow on its companion. The rest of the frontliners arrived to surround the tray ants, and the mages began casting their magic. Boom. 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 A rain of spells exploded over the Trent's bodies. One of the tray ants swept its arm out, repelling most of the frontliners away. However, Bai Kai Shui held his position, refusing to retreat. He loudly roared and struck the tray ant using shield bash. The key to being a successful fighter isn't necessarily the ability to be aggressive. It's the ability to be firm and stable. It doesn't matter what situation, you mustn't create any openings that could lead to a break in the ranks, Nie Yan frankly advised, after seeing Bai Kai Shui's action. Although Nie Yan believed Bai Kai Shui was a decent player, he was still far from being an expert in Nie Yan's eyes. In reality, before he reincarnated, those who were stronger than him could be found everywhere. It was just that everyone in the present was simply new to the game. The players were still gradually familiarizing themselves with the combat and different skills and techniques in the game. However, Nie Yan was different. He had over 10 years of experience in the game as a thief, and was already quite familiar with the various aspects of the game. The saying goes, practice makes perfect, and Nie Yan, with his 10 years of gameplay knowledge, had already far exceeded any current player in the game. The techniques he used now that would cause others to exclaim in admiration would be standard 10 years later. There were still a few genuinely difficult techniques that even he wasn't able to grasp. Those were the true highly advanced techniques. Bai Kai Shui tuned down his aggression after listening to Nie Yan's advice. When they first met, he wasn't particularly impressed with Nie Yan's ability. However, after witnessing Nie Yan's display of skill just a moment ago, he became thoroughly convinced even if he wasn't able to see it clearly. Since Nie Yan was elevated to the status of a super expert in his mind, he would firmly believe in any advice that he was given by Nie Yan. After focusing more on defense, even though the Trent's attacks were fierce, he found it easier to hold his ground. He stood more stably, and the pressure he felt had immediately lessened. Chapter 49. Insane Leveling Speed. After all was said and done, Nie Yan had knowledge of the next 10 years of gameplay, events, and updates. Just a few words from him to Bai Kai Shui, plain boiled water, would allow the latter to reap endless benefits. Another wave of spells struck the tray ants. After the third wave, the first tray ant collapsed and exploded into a pile of wood debris. 10 seconds later, the second tray ant collapsed as well. Nie Yan walked over their corpses and rummaged through the wood pile. He found a few coppers and a pair of bronze-grade mage gloves with focus +2. A pair of mage gloves dropped. Decide who should have it among yourselves, Nie Yan said and threw the gloves over to Yulan, Blue Feather. Naturally, Tang Yao and Dusk declined as they had no use for such gloves. Even though the bronze-grade gloves were decent, it was still inferior to their set equipment. In the end, the player named Pirate had the winning bid and received the pair of gloves for 12 copper. The money from his bid was then evenly split among the other team members. In this fashion, players could obtain equipment inexpensively rather than paying higher prices in the marketplace. Nie Yan, that move earlier was amazing. How did you pull it off? You should teach me next time. Yao Yao, Dark Mystery, exclaimed excitedly, since crossbow techniques similarly applied to magic as well. She was considered an expert amongst her friends, but in reality, she felt there was quite a large gap between herself and the true experts like Nie Yan. Nie Yan replied with a faint smile and said, "Sure. Actually, it's not really that difficult. I'll tell you later when we get out of the dungeon." After he finished speaking, he walked back to his prior position so they could continue the run. Nie Yan lured the tray ants over one after the other. Sometimes, only one lumbered over. Other times, they brought one or two companions with them. However, there were never more than 3 tray ants at once. Since they ran the dungeon on specialist difficulty, the drop rate was increased by over 500%. Moreover, the type of equipment dropped was of a much higher quality. When all 18 tray ants were killed, the team obtained 2 more pieces of bronze-grade equipment with decent properties and 1 piece of silver-grade equipment. When Yulan and her team ran this dungeon on easy, they obtained no more than 5 pieces of bronze-grade equipment per run. The properties of the equipment they picked up weren't spectacular either. Yet, at present, the value of their recently dropped equipment far surpassed the profits of an entire run for them on easy. Moreover, this was still the beginning of the dungeon. Such a fact put the members of the team in higher spirits. The profits from running a specialist dungeon are staggering. Dusk exclaimed. He felt the current drop rate was unimaginable. "This is only the beginning," Nie Yan replied. From his experience, these profits were simply a drop in the bucket. The total amount earned in a specialist run was much more. "The path splits up ahead," Dusk called out. Everyone cast their gaze forward. The path between the forest thickets forked into 2 different directions. "We'll head west," Nie Yan replied. "Aren't we supposed to go east?" Dusk asked in surprise. He and Sleepy Fox always went east when running this dungeon because the path to the west was a dead end. Regardless of the selected difficulty, the map for the Tray Ant Forest always stayed the same. You won't go wrong by listening to my instructions. While it's true the west path leads to a dead end, don't you think it's odd for the path to exist for no reason? In fact, that area actually contains something very special. However, we'll have to be a little more cautious. Many tray ants lurk on the path ahead, making it quite dangerous, Nie Yan replied. The secret to the dead end was hidden quite deeply. Very few people were able to discover it. If it weren't for the information from his past life, he might have missed out on a great opportunity. Everyone followed Nie Yan and took the west path. While on the path, they encountered many tray ants roaming around. Sometimes, the tray ants even charged towards the team. However, thanks to Nie Yan's reminders, they were able to prepare in advance. Smothering strike. Nie Yan struck a tray ant from behind and stunned it. He then turned around to attack another one nearby. Bai Kai Shui and the rest of the frontliners rushed up to take aggro while the mages followed in tow to boom. Boom! Boom! A volley of spells bombarded the 2 tray ants. The 2 tray ants finally collapsed to the ground. From their corpses, they found 3 coppers and a single skill book. Skill book: Uncanny Dodge, Passive. Description: increases the player's senses and ability to evade attacks. Properties: Evasion +2, Awareness +1. Restrictions: Thief, Warrior, Paladin. Can be learned by any faction. Since it's a skill book I can learn, I'll be taking it, Nie Yan said to the team. The skill book was quite rare. Even its drop rate on Specialist was very low. The skill could be learned by thieves, warriors, and paladins. If he were to put it up for auction, it could sell for at least 2 silvers. Furthermore, at present, it was a skill book that had yet to appear on the marketplace. If such a skill book appeared in a run beside theirs, that team's members would certainly fight or even become enemies over it. However, Nie Yan directly took it without any opposition. Although many members drooled over the skill book, no one dared to say anything since they had already accepted Nie Yan's conditions before setting out. Besides, without him, let alone obtaining such a good item, they wouldn't even be able to take one step forward in this specialist dungeon. Each class had a maximum of 50 skill slots. For an average thief to fill even 25 of those slots was an accomplishment. Most players were able to comfortably get by with around 10 active skills. Players able to attain more than 20 active skills were in the top ranks among the player base. Therefore, the majority of players had their skill bars padded with passive skills. Some skills could be improved as time went on. However, those were few and far between. The bulk of skills obtained by players generally couldn't be improved. Skills could also be forgotten to free up space in the skill bar. Therefore, once some lower-level skills outlived their use, they could be replaced with higher-level ones. Uncanny Dodge was classified as one of the skills that couldn't be improved. Nie Yan glanced at his character page after learning the skill. His evasion and awareness had increased. The stat bonuses from passive skills were permanent. He felt passive skills were much better because the stat bonuses from equipment would disappear once the gear was unequipped. The team had walked halfway through the path just enough to see the edge of the forest. They could hear the gentle melody of a flute as the sound drifted between the leaves and floated into their ears. The clear melody moved the hearts of the members in the team. There's a delirious old man who speaks nothing but gibberish at the end of the forest. No matter how we inquired or interacted with him, he wouldn't give us any sort of quest. Since we could beat the Treant King regardless and the old man didn't seem to do anything, we figured he was just a useless NPC. Don't tell me he's actually part of a questline or something. Dusk asked and turned to face Nie Yan. He didn't know whether Nie Yan had any thoughts on this old man. There's never an NPC who appears in a dungeon without reason. They have a 90% chance of being related to the main storyline, Nie Yan replied before continuing on the path. Dusk looked on in confusion. Could Nie Yan have found some clues regarding this old man? In any case, he feared this attempt would be futile as well. Nie Yan had read over detailed guides for every dungeon in the game. Moreover, he himself had personally experienced 99% of these dungeons. The matter of the senile old man was an easy case for him to solve. Nie Yan, have you been through this dungeon before? Yao Yao asked. She was quite curious. Why did he seem to know everything about this dungeon? I've run this dungeon with a team before, Nie Yan replied with a nod. On specialist as well? Nope, only on normal difficulty. Why were you so confident in entering the dungeon on specialist then? Like I said before, specialist isn't actually that hard. You simply need to have enough skill, and if you understand the dungeon well enough, passing it on specialist won't be difficult at all, Nie Yan replied. When Nie Yan spoke in a confident and certain tone, it almost seemed as if every matter that appeared before him could be easily resolved. Yao Yao quietly gazed at Nie Yan. The outline of his face, as well as his overall appearance, still looked somewhat childish. A little bit of stubble had barely grown out of his chin. He wasn't particularly handsome, but he had a peculiar personality that made her subconsciously feel she could trust and rely on him. As Yao Yao stared longer than what was considered polite, a thought suddenly emerged into her mind and she quickly turned away. A faint tinge of red could be seen on her elegant face. Yao Yao, how did you meet him again? Yulan asked as she stood right beside Yao Yao. She also became quite interested in Nie Yan. The game servers had barely opened a week ago, so such a strong player was a rare sight. Remember when I was killing water spiders in Lake Rando? He was the one who saved me that day. If it weren't for him, I'm afraid I would be a level lower right now, Yao Yao replied. She shuddered at the thought of losing one level. Actually, she didn't know how she got into such a mess in the first place, but she had found herself being surrounded by 6 water spiders. She managed to kill 3 of them after using up 2 scrolls and a basic health potion. However, the remaining 3 nearly ended her life. Yulan couldn't help thinking Yao Yao was extremely lucky to have met Nie Yan back then. Even if you searched every nook and cranny, you wouldn't necessarily find someone as skilled as him. Along the path, the team had killed another Treant and a jingling sound rang out. A white light then surrounded Nie Yan's body. I leveled up, Nie Yan said and glanced at his character page. He had finally reached level 4. Congratulations! Congratulations! The team members applauded one after the other. Nie Yan, you leveled up already? How are you so quick? Tang Yao exclaimed in surprise. Just yesterday, he was almost 50% ahead of Nie Yan in experience. How did Nie Yan suddenly get so far ahead of him in only one day? Chapter 50. Treant Caretaker. I handed in a quest before I got off last night. It gave some fairly decent experience, so my level rose by quite a bit. What kind of quest gives so much experience at once? Tell me, where is it? I want to try it too. It was a unique quest. Ah, so it was a unique quest. Oh well, forget it then, Tang Yao replied in a disappointed manner. Unique quests were generally quite hard to trigger. Though their difficulties varied, the rewards for these quests were always extremely generous. Nie Yan, you're already level 4? Yao Yao exclaimed in shock. Nie Yan was only level 2 when she first encountered him, yet he reached level 4 after only 2 days? Wasn't this leveling speed a bit too monstrous?
Aha! Nie Yan nodded.
Even more shocked to hear this news was Dusk. He had heard from Flying Stone 3 days prior that Nie Yan had only been level 0 when they first met. Barely several days have passed and he's already level 4. No wonder he dared to start all over again. It's because he had the confidence to rise up. That's why he dared to delete his old warrior character. This guy is impressive. And not the average kind of impressive either, Dusk said to himself. Several days ago, Nie Yan didn't put much thought into his explanation for Stone. He made up a story by telling Stone he simply deleted his old account and was restarting. After all, it was an easy explanation for why he knew so much about the dungeons. Finally! Level 4. Nie Yan glanced at his experience bar. Currently, the highest level player in the game had only reached level 6. Even groups like Sleepy Fox and his team averaged around level 5. If he kept going at his current pace, he was certain to overtake them. It was only a matter of time. As the team neared the edge of the forest, the members could see a distant cliff face ahead. Trees, shrubs, and flowers, along with other various plants, flourished and grew vigorously on its near vertical incline. Presumably, this steep rock face was the end of the west path. In addition to the cliff face, the team caught sight of a lone NPC at the edge of the forest, an elderly man in a shabby-looking cap. He sat beside a nearby tree with his back supported by the trunk, absorbed in playing the flute he held in his hands. The song was dreary and distant, as if its melody had drifted through the forest since antiquity. Nie Yan examined the old man. The name displayed above his head read, Nameless Old Man, but Nie Yan knew this NPC's actual name, Einpat the Treyant Caretaker. He was this forest's protector. Under his supervision, humans and Treyants coexisted peacefully. However, around a month ago, the Treyants suddenly went out of control and began slaughtering any humans that entered the forest. When traces of dark elf activity were discovered in the area, the Viridian Empire's Council of Elders issued a statement. They called for the brave adventurers of the Empire to enter the forest and kill the most dangerous being inside the Treyant King. This was where the main storyline of the Treyant Forest dungeon begun. Adventurers, you have traveled a long way, but please turn back now. This area is very dangerous. The Treyants will kill anyone who enters the forest, so please hurriedly depart. When night descends, beneath the light of the moon, they gain a strange demonic power that increases their strength immensely. The nameless old man stopped playing his flute upon seeing Nie Yan approach and advised him to turn back. Respected caretaker Einpat, it's an honor to grace your presence. We've come here in order to exterminate the evil Treyant King. While these Treyants have gone berserk, it is my hope that God will allow them to be saved, Nie Yan replied in a sincere and righteous manner. Damn those wretched beings from the underground. They should receive divine judgment. They stole my flute and hid it somewhere while snickering in the shadows. Caretaker Einpat furiously exclaimed. This. Right here. It's clearly a prompt for a quest, but this old guy never gave it to us. No matter how we talked to him after, the old coot would only tell us to hurriedly leave. After that, we didn't bother with him anymore and went straight to killing the Treyant King, Dusk said in the team chat. That's because you guys ran this dungeon on hard difficulty. If we don't trigger this NPC's dialogue in specialist difficulty, we'd have no way to beat the Treyant King. The boss on specialist is much more difficult than its counterpart on hard, Nie Yan replied. He then glanced at the shadows in the distance before turning his head and continuing his conversation with Einpat. It is them. I immediately discovered their presence the moment I entered the forest. May the radiance of light purify these wretched demons. Adventurer, you can actually detect their presence? Good. If not for those 2 damned dark elves snatching my flute, the Treyants wouldn't have gone berserk. Here, I personally created this disillusioning powder. It can reveal their true appearances and prevent them from escaping into the shadows again. Please, kill them and retrieve my flute. Then you'll be able to defeat the Traiant King. Caretaker Einpat rejoiced in surprise. System: you've obtained disillusioning powder. Quantity: 3. Disillusioning powder reveals all hidden players and monsters within a 30-meter radius for 20 seconds. After receiving the powder, Nie Yan glanced at the distant shadows once more. Along with transcendent insight, his awareness far exceeded other thieves of the same level. Therefore, he was able to keenly sense the malicious entities stalking the shadows ever since he and his team entered the dungeon. Out of everyone in the team, only Nie Yan had managed to notice the presence of those 2 dark elves. You received the quest? Dusk asked blankly. Prior to this, he, Sleepy Fox, and their team had tried numerous methods but were unable to retrieve even a single clue from this old man. He never expected it would be so simple to receive the quest while under Nie Yan's lead. Yeah, let's keep moving. We've still got a lot of work to do, Nie Yan replied. Really? Was there really something following us? Yao Yao followed Nie Yan's gaze. Besides the shadows, there was absolutely nothing there. She suddenly felt a deep chill run down her spine. Just a bunch of frail dark elves. There's nothing to worry about. Nie Yan then began strutting towards the darker areas in the forest. With 18 others following from behind, Nie Yan led the team out of the opening where the elderly NPC resided. He took them through a long and narrow path between the trees and brought them to the cliff face. At the base of the cliff, everyone could see a dense blanket of green covering the entire rock face where all sorts of vegetation grew. Why did we come here? Tang Yao asked. It wasn't just Tang Yao. Everyone else also felt puzzled as to why Nie Yan led them here. Nie Yan glanced upward at the cliff face above them and said, We came here to look for an opportunity to catch those 2 dark elves. Hold on, I think I saw something over on that side. Nie Yan walked alongside the wall and jumped. He leapt 3 meters into the air before clinging onto the vegetation on the cliff face. He then shot a webline at a shrub 3 meters above him. Resembling a nimble monkey, he climbed higher and higher by grabbing onto nearby protruding rocks. Guys, look over there. Yao Yao pointed above. Everyone looked in the direction. Nie Yan reached over and found the chest embedded deeply inside the crack on the cliff face. He didn't know who discovered. Chapter 51. Dark Elves. This chest wasn't locked, so Nie Yan stretched out his arm and opened it. System: opening chest. Estimated completion: 37%. 53%. Click. The treasure chest's lid popped open. Nie Yan reached in and dug around. For the most part, items found inside dungeon chests were generated randomly, so anything could appear. Now it was all just a matter of luck. After digging around for what seemed like half a day, Nie Yan picked up a skill book and a necklace from the chest. Ah, it's an accessory. Guess my luck isn't too bad.
Nie Yan felt pleasantly surprised.
Accessories such as rings, necklaces, and medallions were the rarest type of equipment players could receive. Since they were so difficult to find, they fetched a high price on the marketplace and most players could only leave their accessory slots empty. Forest necklace. Properties: unidentified. Nie Yan appraised the item using transcendent insight. Forest necklace. Silver. Requirements: level 0. Properties: defense 2 to 3, dexterity +2, awareness +1. Weight: 1 pound. Restrictions: none. What a good accessory! It's a silver-grade necklace. Nie Yan felt quite elated. He then turned to look at the skill book. It's a lesser heal skill book. The lesser heal skill was the lowest level healing skill of the priest class. However, it was difficult to acquire since its skill book could only be found within dungeons. This was also one of the reasons its market price remained so high, to the extent it was even more valuable than some silver-grade equipment. Having received the forest necklace, Nie Yan didn't mind too much about losing the lesser heal skill book. If he were to place it up for auction, he'd only receive around 3 silver. Such an insignificant sum wasn't worth batting his eye over. Nie Yan descended the cliff and met up with the team. We're pretty lucky. The chest dropped a necklace and a lesser heal skill book. You guys can have the skill book since I don't need it, but I'll be taking the necklace, Nie Yan said. He didn't have to pay a single cent when taking an item. On the other hand, Yu Lan, Blue Feather, and her team had to share their profits with Dusk and Tang Yao. After all, the two were invited here and couldn't just leave empty-handed. It's a silver-grade necklace. By Kaishui's, plain boiled water, and the other's eyes practically fell out of their sockets. A silver-grade necklace. Now just how much was that worth? The group watched in anguish as Nie Yan put the necklace away. Ah, it's such a pity. Why does it have to belong to someone else? If it weren't for him finding this chest, we would have never gotten this lesser heal skill book in the first place. It would be better if we just buy this skill book off of you, Brother Nie, Yulan said. She wasn't willing to take advantage of Nie Yan's generosity. The skill book was brought back by his own efforts. They hadn't done anything to help at all. Since you put it that way, I'll be straightforward and sell it to you. The market price for a lesser heal skill book is around 3 silvers, possibly even more. However, I'll lower the price and sell it to you for cheaper 2 silvers. How does that sound? This price can't be considered disadvantageous to you, right?
Nie Yan replied.
He wasn't the least bit reserved in agreeing to Yu Lan's request. Couldn't you have just politely declined instead? Yao Yao interjected, stamping her feet. Nie Yan calmly laughed and replied, Since someone is so adamant about spending their money, why should I refuse? Only fools would refuse money. If you want this lesser heal skill book, I can give it to you. Even if you wanted 10 of them, I would still help you find them. However, your captain wants to buy it instead because she doesn't want to owe me any favors. Let's say I disregard her sentiments and politely refuse her offer. Even if you wouldn't mind me being a hypocrite, I'd still be despising myself for being one. Our team funds are only around 5 silvers. Would it be possible to pay you the 2 silvers at a later date? Yulan asked in slight embarrassment. If she paid the 2 silvers now, their funds would be even more lacking than they were now. Are your funds that lacking? You even need to owe someone 2 silvers? Ah, whatever. You can pay me back whenever you want, Nie Yan replied and waved his hands. An entire team couldn't even bring out 2 silvers. Although that appeared quite pathetic, most teams only had 2 silvers. In reality, Yu Lan and her team were quite well off. They were just naturally no match when paired up against a walking money bag like Nie Yan. The entire team stared at Nie Yan. These were 2 silvers. It wasn't a paltry amount. Yet he still didn't attach any importance to them. This man was truly rich and overbearing. Yao Yao pulled at Nie Yan's sleeves and gazed at him while blinking her innocent eyes. She asked in a harmless and sincere tone, Nie Yan, would you really be willing to gift me 10 skill books? Sure, but you never told me where I could find those 10 skill books to give you. Nie Yan felt a cold sweat run down his forehead. He knew exactly what sort of wicked thoughts were running through this enchantress' mind. Humph. You don't even have the least bit of sincerity, Yao Yao replied and feigned anger. Nevertheless, the corners of her mouth curved into a smile. Of course, she would never actually ask Nie Yan to give her 10 lesser heal skill books. She only wanted to tease him a bit, that's all. Tang Yao glanced at the overhanging cliff. He was actually able to spot that chest all the way over there? He was increasingly unable to make sense of Nie Yan. The changes in this childhood friend of his became even greater and greater, to the point where even he was having slight troubles recognizing him. However, one thing remained certain. No matter how much Nie Yan changed, he would always remain as his brother. Alright, let's focus on the matter at hand. We're going to have to kill those 2 dark elves that have been stalking us from behind. There's a ravine in the area. We'll split up into 2 groups. I'll lead the first group into the ravine while the second group trails us. Those 2 dark elves are quite crafty, so we'll have to lure them into the ravine and trap them in there by blocking their exit. Afterward, we'll use the disillusioning powder to reveal them. However, I want everyone to stay on full alert. Even though those 2 dark elves don't possess much fighting strength, they make up for it with their speed. We have to make sure they don't escape. Otherwise, it'll be very difficult to make them fall for the same trick twice, Nie Yan ordered and began carrying out his strategy. The team separated into 2 groups. The first group of 10 remained on standby while the second group advanced into the ravine. While moving forward, Nie Yan paid careful attention to his surroundings. He noticed the slight movement of a silhouette 11 meters ahead. The other one didn't follow?
Nie Yan questioned inwardly.
However, he was then able to sense something following them from behind. The entity kept 10 meters of distance between them. They're both here. Nie Yan's lips curved into a faint smile. These 2 elves are quite cowardly, afraid to even separate from themselves. Good, we'll wipe them both out at once. Nie Yan and the group entered the ravine. On either side of them were towering walls of rocks around 10 meters high. In between was a small trail that was able to fit 5 or 6 players walking side by side. This narrow ravine was the perfect site to set up an ambush. However, they had to succeed on the first try. Those 2 crafty elves wouldn't be easily fooled twice. Nie Yan sensed the 2 elves were hesitating at the entrance of the ravine. After a brief moment, they entered and followed. They took the bait. Good, now they're trapped just like a turtle in a jar.
Nie Yan inwardly rejoiced.
He then ordered through the team chat, Yulan, you guys can come over now. Block the ravine's entrance and by all means, don't let those crafty buggers escape. Yulan felt strange and somewhat uncomfortable when Nie Yan addressed her without any honorifics, but this wasn't the time to bother with such a matter. She led the remaining team members and rushed over to the ravine. We're here.
Iulang inform.
Nie Yan retrieved the disillusioning powder and threw it in the air, whereupon the powder scattered and floated across the ravine. The powder's area of effect constantly expanded and eventually covered the entire ravine. When the powder landed on the nearby shadows, the figures of the 2 impish elves were gradually revealed. With pointed ears, their emaciated figures were nearly all skin and bone while the color of their skin was a dark ashy gray. Besides their physical features, the clothing on their bodies were shabby and worn out. While the high elves in the game were beautiful and handsome, these 2 dark elves were so shamefully ugly it was no wonder they were always hidden in darkness. RREKGGTHH. One of the elves let out an ear-piercing screech. Chapter 52. Einpat's Flute. Both elves turned their backs and frantically dashed towards the ravine's exit. Like a pair of hares, their movements were quite nimble. Nonetheless, they were quite fragile as well and only had around 100 health. A single round of spells was enough to kill them instantly. You want to run. In your dreams. As if he were an arrow released from a bow, Nie Yan quickly shot out from behind. The rest of the group trailed him and followed in pursuit. Right now, Yulan's group should have already blocked off the exit. Before the 2 elves made it too far, they were immediately stopped in their tracks upon reaching the ravine's passage. Sure enough, Yulan and her group had already arrived and firmly stood in place, blocking off the elves' only path to freedom. They were already trapped with no hope of escape. The 2 elves quickly glanced at each other before dashing towards the cliff face. When they had scaled 3 meters of the cliff, Nie Yan arrived right behind them and suddenly leaped into the air. He reached out with his arm and managed to grab one of the elves by the leg. He then extended his left hand and shot out a line of webbing from his silk spinner ring. As the web line wrapped itself around the other elf's leg, he pulled back sharply and flung the 2 elves off the cliff face. Crash! Their bodies made heavy contact with the ground, causing a cloud of dust to form and rise in the air. With Nie Yan's dexterity and jump range being so high, his range of movements and speed were astonishing to a frightening degree. These 2 dark elves simply weren't his match. Shortly after the rest of the team arrived and surrounded the 2 elves, the mages raised their staffs and prepared to unleash a rain of spells. Raya! Ryek! The 2 elves revealed pleading expressions on their faces. Hold up! Don't kill them for now. Nie Yan's heart jumped in excitement. In his previous life, the player only needed to kill these 2 elves and Einpat's flute would drop. When they handed the flute back to Einpat, they could proceed with the dungeon. However, he had never come across a situation such as this, where the elves wouldn't fight back and instead pleaded for their lives. In his previous life, The highest completion rate attained for this dungeon was only around 75%. Even 10 years into the game, no one beat the dungeon to full completion. Yet at present, he couldn't say for sure these two elves wouldn't lead him to any information regarding the missing 25%. When he was level 4 in his previous life, the stats of his game character simply couldn't compare with his stats right now. At that time, he was only an average low-level player, unable to obtain even a simple set of bronze-grade equipment for himself. There was no need to even mention ludicrous aspirations such as attaining the legendary chapter of courage. In short, the dexterity and jump range of his previous character were too inadequate. Let alone capturing these dark elves, even overtaking them was impossible. Therefore every team at the time, including his own, could only blast them with magic when they attempted to scale the ravine's walls. With their two bodies curled up like potato bugs, the two elves knelt on the ground and gazed at Nie Yan with begging expressions in the hopes that he would spare their lives. The elves spoke in an ancient language Nie Yan wasn't proficient with, the language of the elves. However, from their body language and expressions, he could roughly tell they were begging for forgiveness. Who here can speak Elvish? Nie Yan turned around and asked the team. The surrounding team members gazed at each other before shaking their heads. They only knew one language in the game, and that was the common language spoken in the Empire. As for Elvish, from the start, let alone understanding it, no one had even heard of its existence before.
Nie Yan silently pondered.
If no one knew Elvish, communicating with these two dark elves would basically be impossible. He glanced at his own language menu. At present, there were only 4 languages: Common, Dragon, Ancient Common, and Kasate Giant. Suddenly, he had another thought. These dark elves are an ancient race and possess extremely long lifespans. Perhaps they'll understand other languages? Petty and frail dark elves, why have you come here?
Nie Yan spoke in dragon tongue.
Nie Yan spoke various syllables in a deep tone. The sound of his voice frightened the surrounding team members. However, they soon realized he was simply speaking another language. Upon hearing the dragon language, the two elves were badly frightened, even trembling as they gazed at Nie Yan. One of the elves, who was somewhat more courageous, continued to stare at him with caution and bewilderment. Eventually, he drummed up enough courage and crawled towards Nie Yan's feet, kissing them before he fell back and began to speak. The elf also spoke in dragon tongue. Long live the dragon god. This one's name is VRMMO. Lord, I sincerely ask of you, are you of the dragon race, disguised as human? During the distant dark era, the dark elves were unlike the other races. As one of the races enslaved by the dragon race, they didn't join the rebellion with races such as humans, high elves, and dwarves in fighting for their freedom. Their society and faith remained pious in their belief of the dragons. Even now, those existences that were currently hidden within the deepest corners of the world were still worthy of their reverence and loyalty.
Nie Yan felt elated.
Humans who knew dragon tongue were few and far between. This dark elf had been scared witless and mistook him for an actual dragon. It's best if I take advantage of this misunderstanding. Indeed. Long live the dragon god. VRMMO, I do not wish to repeat myself. Why have you come to this place? Nie Yan spoke in dragon tongue once again. Lord, our drow dark elf tribe suffered a crushing defeat at the Hilton stronghold. In the chaos and confusion, my companion and I passed through the plains and escaped to this forest. VRMMO replied.
Ah, VRMMO.
So it turns out you two were deserters from the battle at Hilton stronghold. Lord, we are not deserters. This one named VRMMO is a brave and courageous soldier. We are gathering intelligence for our tribe. In the evening 3 days from now, our drow tribe will strike back at the Hilton stronghold. At that time, VRMMO will once again return to the battlefield. VRMMO spoke with courage and conviction. System. New quest received. Bring the heads of the 2 dark elves to Sir Cavrot in the Hilton stronghold and inform him before the drow tribe commences their counterattack. A branching quest line. This was an exciting discovery. However, Nie Yan still maintained a calm and collected outer appearance. He continued to speak to VRMMO as if everything was normal. As for the opposite party, VRMMO believed Nie Yan was a dragon. He truthfully answered each and one of Nie Yan's questions without exception and didn't dare to conceal even a shred of information. As Nie Yan and the Dark Elf continued to speak in the strange language, the team members had various thoughts. Just what were they talking about? Those Dark Elves seemed to be quite fearful of Nie Yan as well. Why was that? Everyone felt shocked. Just when did Nie Yan learn the language of other races? VRMMO, the Treyant caretaker, is a friend of mine. He informed me that you've stolen his flute. Tell me, how shall I enact your punishment? Upon hearing Nie Yan's words, VRMMO kowtowed repeatedly and begged for forgiveness. He then took out the flute and handed it to Nie Yan. The entire flute was lacquer black while its surface was carved in turtle shell patterns. As Nie Yan examined it, he noticed the flute appeared very simple and unadorned. He then glanced at its properties. Einpat's flute. Quest item. Requirements. Level 0. Description. A flute used by the Treyant caretaker. Able to affect surrounding Treyants. Properties. Willpower plus 20, Strength plus 20, Reflex plus 20, Health plus 300. Reduces the stats of surrounding Treyants by 50%. Restrictions. Can only be equipped within the Treyant forest. No mistake, that's the flute we're looking for. Once Nie Yan put the flute away, he sent an order through the team chat to kill them. The surrounding mages raised their staffs and began chanting their magic. To the team's surprise, the two Dark Elves didn't resist and remained kneeling on the ground. They stayed motionless and silent as they awaited their deaths. Boom! 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 The spells rained down on the two elves. They remained firmly kneeling even when suffering the assault. It was only until their health bars fell empty that the two could no longer hold themselves up. Their lifeless corpses slumped to the ground, collapsing with a gentle thud that brought a small cloud of dust into the air. System. You've obtained Dark Elf's head. Quantity. 2. Alright, now that's settled and done with. Good. They even dropped a pair of warrior boots when they died. Decide between yourselves who gets it. We'll be heading off to kill the Treyant King next, Nie Yan announced. This is going to be the first time in history a team finishes this dungeon with a perfect completion rate. Capturing those two Dark Elves led to a pleasant surprise. Nie Yan, what did you and those Dark Elves talk about? Why did it seem like they were very afraid of you? Not to mention when we were attacking them, they didn't even dare to retaliate, Yao Yao asked after walking to Nie Yan's side. The rest of the team also stared at Nie Yan with inquisitive gazes. Even Yulan couldn't help but focus her attention on him. Chapter 53. Top Quality Round Shield. Oh that was nothing. I just spoke to them in dragon tongue, and they mistook me for a real dragon. The Dark Elves have been slaves to the dragon race since the ancient Dark Era. Even in the present, their society still considers themselves servants of the dragons, which is why they were so respectful and fearful of me. Thanks to the information they provided, I also received a branching questline, so I'll be handing it in after we return to town, Nie Yan replied. Dragon tongue? When did you learn the dragon language? Yao Yao asked. It appeared Nie Yan still held quite a few secrets since he continued revealing surprises one after the other. Yeah, I heard dragons were extremely rare, Tang Yao added. Nie Yan was truly becoming more and more outstanding. Even the language of the dragons wasn't out of his reach. In the same moment, Dusk's eyes sparkled as he thought of a certain possibility. Could Nie Yan's ability to speak dragon tongue be related to the emergence of that dragon in Link Town? Nie Yan soon realized his slip of the tongue and turned to look at Dusk. From the expression on the latter's face, he could tell this fellow had grasped onto some clues. Yesterday, actually, I ended up accidentally stumbling into a ravine where I found an old book. When I turned the pages, I discovered it was actually an old history which recorded the events of past eras. Before I knew it, I received an announcement telling me I learned Dragon Tongue, K-Sate Giant, and Ancient Common. Afterward, that dragon emerged and chased me around before I managed to make a lucky escape, Nie Yan replied in a casual manner. This explanation was specifically directed towards Dusk. He felt it was better to partially tell the truth than to allow the existence of the chapter of courage to be leaked. Dusk readily accepted the explanation. After all, He didn't feel too good sticking his nose so deeply into another person's secrets either. Truthfully, learning new languages isn't that hard at all. Head over to the library when your levels are higher, and if you pay 1 gold, you'll be able to learn the ancient common language. Also, if you head to the libraries belonging to the giant race, you'll be able to learn the K-Sate giant language after paying 3 gold. How do you know all this? Dusk and the others asked in astonishment. Head over to the library and look for yourself. Just browse through some of the books there, and you'll have an even better understanding of the entire Atlanta continent. There are various class-related books as well. If you manage to read them all, I guarantee you'll be experts as well. Ah! Who the hell goes to the library? An entire library has so many books. Even if you randomly pull one off the shelf, it'll still have up to 1,000,000 characters. If I had to read every class and history-related book in the library, it would take me a month at the very least. Who the hell has that much free time on their hands? Yeah, who has the time to read those thick and heavy books? In his past life, Nie Yan often suffered setbacks while playing his thief and developed an interest in reading as a result. After spending over a month reading at the library, he couldn't help but admit the history of the Atlanta continent as well as its stories were quite fascinating and engaging. From the origins of his class to the biographies of legendary thieves and their abilities, he read it all without missing a single word. Thanks to his exceptional memory, he gained many insights. By the time he walked out of the library, he left with a thorough understanding of his class. After several more years of polishing his skills, he ranked as one of the top 50 thieves and was somewhat famous. I've only read a few myself. The biographies there are pretty well written, Nie Yan said with a smile. Nie Yan still had the leisure to go to the library and read. They had frequently risked life and death to reach their current level, yet they were still easily overtaken by Nie Yan. The crowd couldn't help but feel a little disheartened at such a thought. Many of the team members sighed deeply and no longer had the heart to inquire any further. Who knows what sort of rewards you'll receive after turning in that quest? By Kai Shui, plain boiled water, exclaimed, voicing out a similar thought among the crowd. Ultimately, the topic everyone still cared for the most was the quest rewards. What was that flute that dropped just a moment ago? It's a quest item called Einpat's flute. We'll have to return it to that old man before we exit the dungeon. Nie Yan displayed the flute's properties for the rest of the team to see, whereupon everyone inhaled a breath of cold air. The flute's properties were simply astonishing. If it could be brought outside of the dungeon, it would most certainly cause every player to go crazy over it. However, Nie Yan didn't feel too much of a loss regarding this flute because he already possessed the chapter of courage. Ah! It's such a pity! Why do we have to return it to the NPC? Many of the team members felt aggrieved. Nie Yan opened the trade menu and traded the flute over to Bai Kai Shui. This item had to be handed over to the team's main tank for it to be used to its fullest potential. Holy crap! I have over 700 health. Even if it's the Treant King, I'll have nothing to be afraid of. Bai Kai Shui confidently boasted after checking his improved stats. Don't underestimate the Treant King on Specialist. That thing is really difficult to deal with. Wait and see. You'll be eating your own words very soon. After splashing cold water over Bai Kai Shui's parade, Nie Yan said, since our priests aren't able to learn revive yet, we'll have a much easier time if 2 of them can cast Lesser Heal. I know another location that drops a Lesser Heal skill book, so we'll be heading there next. No way, right? Is the Treant King really that difficult to deal with on Specialist difficulty? Bai Kai Shui asked in shock. After all, he had never faced the Treant King on this difficulty before. He quickly reined himself in after listening to Nie Yan's words. From the moment they entered this dungeon to now, the profits the team earned surpassed everyone's expectations. Even if they discounted the items Nie Yan took for himself, the amount of equipment and skill books they obtained still far exceeded their imaginations. They even thought it would be great if Nie Yan could continue carrying their team just like this. However, this was nothing more than wishful thinking. He was never part of their team in the first place, and his cooperation with them would end after this run. Furthermore, he would never join their team in another dungeon run again. When they thought back to his previous statements, They couldn't help but feel a little angry. They grumbled and voiced complaints in their hearts. Why did Chen Bo have to go and piss off Nie Yan? Originally, they too had felt somewhat dissatisfied when they witnessed Nie Yan driving Chen Bo out. After all, Chen Bo was still a member of their team, and Nie Yan's actions at that time really did seem excessive. Yet at present, they were having a subtle change of heart. Having obtained Einpat's flute, Bai Kai Shui became a genuine and formidable meat shield. With a priest casting lesser heal from the backline, he became an unequaled tank that was able to contend against 5 Traiants alone. After he equipped the flute, it became much easier for the team to clear the path ahead. As they progressed through the run, the amount of equipment they looted quickly piled up. They obtained another lesser heal skill book and 2 pieces of silver-grade equipment. One of them was a pair of thief gloves which was given to Nie Yan. They increased strength by 3 and awareness by 2. The other piece was a recently dropped round shield that raised defense by 15% and increased physique by 5. When the shield dropped, everyone's eyes went wide with shock because it was the first time they had seen such a high-quality shield. Round shields were fundamentally different from normal shields. Their defense was relatively lower compared to regular shields. However, their low weight meant they didn't hinder a player's movements as much as a regular shield would. Thus, round shields with high defense were a hot and very costly commodity in the marketplace. Damn! Even the round shield we got from Black Flame Forest wasn't as good as this one. Dusk widened his eyes in shock. What kind of drop rate was this? Good equipment was just dropping one after another as they progressed towards the boss. He didn't mind passing on the previous drops because they were only bronze grade. However, at present, such an amazing silver-grade round shield suddenly appeared. If you guys are willing to sell, I guarantee my captain would be willing to pay 10 silvers or even higher for that round shield. Everyone present understood the significance of a heavy knight with a good shield. A tank that was able to withstand a boss attacks ensured the survival of the whole team. Therefore, heavy knight equipment with high defense was extremely expensive on the marketplace. The bidding on this type of equipment in the auction house reached new records. However, even so, they remained targets for teams from the larger guilds. We don't plan on selling this shield. Yulan took in a deep breath of air. This shield meant they could still try and take on higher-level dungeons even without Nie Yan's help. Let alone 10 silvers, even if it was for 20 silvers, she still wouldn't sell. Chapter 54. Traiant King. Yulan, Blue Feather, glanced at Nie Yan who stood off to the side in a laissez-faire manner. She thought of the ever-increasing amount of favors they owed him. If this continued, it would soon reach a point where they couldn't possibly repay him. Yao Yao, Dark Mystery, give Nie Yan our thanks. We would have never been able to get all this good equipment if it weren't for him, Yulan suggested. In retrospect, Nie Yan's conditions hadn't been excessive at all. Yao Yao replied. She then walked to Nie Yan's side, her bright eyes examining his expression as she approached. What are you looking at me for? Nie Yan glanced at Yao Yao and smiled. We'll be taking the round shield. You really don't mind losing out on it? Yao Yao faintly smiled and a pair of dimples emerged on her unblemished face. Nie Yan's pulse slightly raced after seeing her elegant yet bewitching smile. However, when he thought of Xie Yao, he immediately regained his composure. It's just a round shield. Do you really think I'm that stingy of a person? In any case, I'm already pretty satisfied as it is. I get to take any useful drops I want, and the Featherfall Jewel from the Traiant King goes to me as well. When we entered the dungeon, did you guys not put in effort too? I definitely couldn't clear this dungeon on my own, he replied. Well, that shield is worth quite a bit of money. My captain asked me to thank you on the team's behalf. Oh! Nie Yan glanced at the nearby Yulan. She was tall, slender, and had a voluptuous figure which could be called perfect. If there were a few more smiles on her face, then she would be rated as quite decent. Moreover, from his memory, he recalled she was quite a prideful figure. It was seldom that she would ever lower her head to someone. As for what he knew about her, it was limited to a certain event where a player took too many liberties with her, and she retaliated by going on a rampage and killing him until he dropped back to level 0. At that point in time, The only thought on Nie Yan's mind was that this woman was extremely terrifying. However, after becoming more familiar with each other, he came to understand she had a quiet and amiable personality. Thus, she never left him with any sort of bad impression. Besides glancing back at her figure every once in a while, he didn't really have many opinions of her. He had never really chatted much with her either, and by the end, they were nothing more than nodding acquaintances. With the new equipment spurring them forward, the team members became even more spirited as they cleared mobs, especially by Kai Shui, plain boiled water, who charged into every battle. Nie Yan and the others took a detour and headed onto a smaller path where they encountered a group of 5 Trey ants. Shortly after making swift work of those Trey ants, another lesser heal skill book dropped from one of their corpses, just as Nie Yan had said earlier. From then on, the number of priests who could cast lesser heal on their team rose to 2. As their group progressed, they completely cleared the path of any and all Trey ants. Eventually, they penetrated into the deepest part of the forest and entered a clearing. The surrounding vegetation visibly lessened. Moreover, no more Trey ants emerged on the path, and even the presence of fauna and insects disappeared. "We're almost there. Be wary of the vines beneath your feet," Nie Yan warned as he raised his guard. He walked at the front of the group and opened up a path by disarming each and every trap along the route. As the team drew closer to the center of the forest, 2 vines which were lying motionless on the ground suddenly sprang to life. Like real serpents, the 2 vines snaked their way closer and shot towards Nie Yan. Nie Yan sidestepped the attack and switched to a reverse grip to slash. The vines were severed upon meeting his blade and fell to the ground. The people in the back also suffered attacks. However, they were safer due to their numbers. Even if actual danger befell one of the members, the others around them could come to the rescue. Therefore, no problems occurred in the back. After passing through the clearing, Nie Yan and the team finally caught sight of the Trey Ant King. It resembled an immense tree towering at over 10 meters high and several meters wide, many times larger than the average Trey ant. Its leaves and branches shrouded the entire sky and cast an immense shadow over the area. However, its most distinct feature lay in the ash-black bark that covered its entire body. The Trey Ant King awoke from its deep slumber, aware of the approaching players as a cold, sinister glow radiated from its ancient eyes. Trey Ant King, Lord Level 5. Health 10,000/10,000. It's Lord class. Dusk screamed in shock. The Trey Ant King had only been an elite class monster when he and his team ran this dungeon. Not only did this version have much more health than its normal difficulty counterpart, it was even upgraded to a higher class. If it weren't for such an overpowered item like Einpat's flute, even if the entire elite team from Holy Empire came over and joined them, they'd likely still end up being wiped. Everyone, prepare yourselves and get into formation. Wait for the heavy night to engage before going in. There's no need to feel anxious. Just listen to my commands, Nie Yan reassured before sprinting towards the Trey Ant King. He stopped upon entering the boss line of sight.
Uresha humans.
For trespassing onto my territory. D. The Trey Ant King roared deeply and slammed a gigantic branch towards Nie Yan. Its gigantic arm left a deep mark on the earth. However, Nie Yan had already rolled out of the way. At that moment, Nie Yan had already fled and circled around its side. The Trey Ant King raised its gigantic arm again and swept it towards Nie Yan. As he watched the massive arm spanning towards him, Nie Yan abruptly lowered his body and slipped into a slide. The Trent's sweeping attack hurtled above and past his head. The fierce pressure alone was enough to cause pain as the wind scraped against his cheek. Just a little bit slower and I would have been swatted into the air by its attack. Nie Yan got up and fled in the other direction. Although the Trey Ant King was overbearing and fierce, during the whole course of events, none of its attacks were able to reach Nie Yan, who evaded like a slippery loach. An average team would have most likely sent their heavy knight, who held Einpat's flute, to engage first since only that player could withstand the attacks of the Trey Ant King. However, they would have neglected one key point. Heavy knights, as their namesake would suggest, wore heavy armor which caused their movements to be hindered and clumsy. They were unable to dodge the Trey Ant King's attacks, which had a strong knockback effect. Thus, they had no chance of closing in on the Trey Ant King without others covering for them. However, if another player were to be struck by an attack, they would undoubtedly die. Nie Yan's movements seemed awkward whenever he evaded the Treant King's attacks. Each time the team believed he was going to die from one of the attacks, they would discover he miraculously survived by dodging, rolling, or jumping out of the way at the very last second. More or less, he appeared to be more scared than hurt as he survived every encounter without mishap. Dusk, however, felt shocked by Nie Yan's actions. Holy shit! He can even do this? What a godly thief! He subconsciously began comparing Nie Yan with the other thieves in his team. However, he suddenly came to the realization that there wasn't a single thief within Holy Empire who could compare to Nie Yan. If there were a thief with even half of Nie Yan's skills in his team, they'd already be quite terrific. From Nie Yan's perspective, the Treant King's attacks were slow and predictable. Each attack gave more than a second of reaction time to get out of the way. Thus, evading its attacks really wasn't much of a problem. It was simple and extremely easy, just like an adult being asked to do a grade schooler's math homework. After making sure the boss aggro was fully on him, Nie Yan gave an order through the team chat by Kai Shui, take the lead and engage the boss. The rest of the frontliners will follow after. Backline, under no circumstances are you to go within 30 meters of the boss. Bai Kai Shui rushed towards the Treant King. Since the boss' attention was completely focused on Nie Yan, he quickly arrived in front of it. He struck the boss with shield bash and followed with heroic strike. -36. -52. Damn it! The Treant King has such high defense. Even with Einpat's flute, his attack still dealt so little damage to it. Shortly after Bai Kai Shui engaged the boss, the other frontliners arrived as well and firmly surrounded the Treant King. Under Bai Kai Shui's fierce assault, the boss aggro quickly shifted. It swept its arm and began attacking him instead. Mages, attack! Just when Nie Yan finished speaking, numerous spells flew into the air. Bang! 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 The spells bombarded the Treant King's body. Roughly a dozen damage numbers appeared above the Treant King's head before drifting upwards and fading away. Most of them were in the low tens and some of them were even misses. However, 2 of them were in the 30s. These were the attacks from Dusk and Tang Yao. Dusk's Dark Winter set and Tang Yao's Fire Chaser set were both from Black Flame Forest. Thus, both of their damage numbers were rather decent. Chapter 55. The Rhythm of a Boss Battle. The Treant King's extremely thick bark served as an effective defense against the player's attacks. Therefore, the damage they dealt could be considered quite decent. The king indignantly roared as it hoisted its massive arm into the air and swiped at Bai Kai Shui, plain boiled water. Bang! Its gigantic branch of an arm slammed into his shield. However, Bai Kai Shui kept his center of gravity low and allowed the shield to absorb the majority of the impact. It resulted in him being pushed back a few steps. However, he ran forward and closed the distance immediately. Bai Kai Shui felt grateful for the advice given to him prior, of how he should remain stable and firm. Sure enough, it became quite useful in this situation. Ordinarily, he wouldn't have merely been pushed back a few steps in such an exchange. Rather, he would have likely been sent flying. Those strikes were quite horrifying, each one reducing his health by 80 or so points. However, he was the sole person able to withstand its attacks, as the other frontliners would inevitably die within 2 strikes. Beams of gentle light fell on the players who were in a melee with the boss. In the meantime, Nie Yan evaluated the strength of the team's healers. Of the 3 priests who knew lesser heal, the main one healed roughly 60 health while the remaining 2 barely reached 50. Not that high. Things will likely get dangerous later. Seems like it's best to remain careful and not leave anything to chance. Due to the efforts of Bai Kai Shui and the other frontliners, the flow of the battle stabilized. Thus, the mages could begin steadily casting their magic. Cast fire elemental magic as much as possible and avoid ice magic. It won't be effective since the boss ice resistance is too high. Nie Yan ordered and circled round the Trent's back since his class received a damage bonus, 30%, while attacking opponents from behind. Paired with his exceptional equipment, his attacks easily pierced its strong defenses. Sparks flew off its body and into the air as magic poured from the sky. Its health had been gradually chipped away and now neared 70%. Do any of our priests have Dispel? One of them does. Great. Pay attention to Bai Kai Shui. Immediately cast Dispel when the boss casts the fear debuff on him. Don't be slow, even a second can cause us a lot of trouble. Nie Yan said. The priest felt somewhat anxious as he listened to Nie Yan's instructions. After all, he was still a novice at the game. He was nicknamed Bamboo Pole by Bai Kai Shui and the others due to his naturally lanky build. He felt quite nervous at the moment, anxiously gripping his staff while his muscles appeared to have been frozen stiff. However, Nie Yan noticed his apprehension and spoke reassuringly, "Relax a bit. I'll remind you when the time comes, so all you'll have to do is cast a spell on my signal." Afterward, Bamboo Pole shot a grateful glance at Nie Yan. Just as its health reached 70%, the boss released a deep roar that sent shivers down everyone's spine. Meanwhile, Bai Kai Shui halted his attacks and involuntarily retreated back while his movements became extremely rigid. "Dispel!" Nie Yan shouted through the team's voice chat. Without delay, Bamboo Pole cast a spell and a bright light illuminated Bai Kai Shui from above. Bai Kai Shui had only retreated a few steps when feared. He charged back into battle and slammed his shield at the Treant King with Shield Bash. "Not bad,"
Nie Yan praised.
Bamboo Pole instantly felt relief seeing as his spell succeeded. Following Nie Yan's directions, the entire team fell into the rhythm of battle. Coupled with the fact that he knew the Treant King's actions in advance, its health bar steadily fell lower. "It's using Lash." The Treant King lifted its vines and sent them lashing at Bai Kai Shui. "Priests, prepare to heal Bai Kai Shui in 3, 2, 1. Now." A gentle shower of light shone on Bai Kai Shui and his health continuously teetered up and down. The line separating life and death lay on a razor-thin edge. However, thanks to the priests, his health managed to hold until the end. Nie Yan, on the other hand, released a flurry of attacks from behind. Roughly 3 minutes later, the entire team had steadily chipped away as its health fell to merely 25%. "Priests, how much mana remaining?" 67. 56. 23. The priest with 23 mana, "Drink your mana potion." The priest downed a basic mana potion after Nie Yan called him out. Suddenly, the Treant King transformed into a shade of red. "Finally! Everyone, get ready!" Bai Kai Shui switched to a defensive stance. "Mages, increase your damage output. Priests, prepare yourselves."
Nie Yan shouted.
Bai Kai Shui, in the moment he heard these instructions, held the shield to his chest and switched stances. The Treant King let out an explosive roar. It raised its arms and slammed down on Bai Kai Shui. Bang! The Treant King's gigantic arms landed on Bai Kai Shui's shield and sent him several steps back, losing over 200 health in the exchange. However, even after such a terrifying attack, the Treant King was unwilling to give up. It raised its arm once more and relentlessly smashed. Bang! Bang! The assault left 2 more craters in the earth while a gentle shower of light fell on Bai Kai Shui in between the attacks. -221. +60. -256. +52. Above Bai Kai Shui's head, for numbers floated upwards as he was repelled back. Such high damage! If it weren't for Einpat's flute, just one of those attacks would instantly kill even the most powerful fighter. Bai Kai Shui felt a cold chill run down his spine as he glanced at his health bar. If it weren't for the timely heals from the priests, he would have long been dead. The Treant King had finished its 3-hit combo and seemed to have come to a rest. However, a moment later, it continued its onslaught of battering their tank. "Bai Kai Shui, pull back. The rest of you guys, hold the line for a bit." Nie Yan began running to Bai Kai Shui's side. Bai Kai Shui dodge rolled the Treant King's next attack and downed a basic health potion. However, the amount of health restored was basically negligible compared to his current total health. The other frontliners rushed up to take Bai Kai Shui's place, forming a human shield as they blocked the Treant King's advance. However, they could only hold it off for a limited time since their defense and health were much lower in comparison to the one they were replacing. Nie Yan arrived at Bai Kai Shui's side and applied an intermediate combat bandage. +20. Plus 20. Plus 20. Drink a basic recovery potion. I already drank one. Wait for the next round of healing from the priests. 2 priests cast Lesser Heal on Bai Kai Shui. After 10 seconds, more than half of his health had recovered. The other frontliners couldn't hold on much longer. There was no one left to take another attack. After all, 2 hits and any one of them would be dead. If the Treant King scored a critical hit, even if they were full health, they would instantly die. Furthermore, 2 of their members had already been killed and sent to the graveyard. Bai Kai Shui, go back in. Nie Yan ordered when Bai Kai Shui's health had recovered past 400. Bai Kai Shui raised his shield and ran up to meet the boss. They had been in a state of crisis just now. Thus, no one dared to be any more careless. Tang Yao, Dusk, and the rest of the backline took out their most powerful spells, unloading each and every one on the Treant King. I'll be out of mana soon. Tang Yao anxiously said. Cast arcane fireballs. It expends the least amount of mana. Warriors and paladins, go all out. Use Flame Slash.
Nie Yan replied.
They only needed to hold out for a little longer. Victory was right before their eyes. They absolutely couldn't fail at the final stretch of the battle. He circled behind the Treant King and used Vital Strike followed by Assassinate. The Trent's health steadily fell. 9%, 8%, 6%. The team became increasingly nervous. None of them were willing to slow down by the slightest degree.
Bang! Bang! Bang!
Fireballs landed on the Treant King's body and left deep wounds upon impact. 3%. All frontliners, retreat. Mages, give it everything you've got. Nie Yan suddenly instructed through the team chat. The warriors and paladins didn't understand why Nie Yan would have them retreat at such a crucial moment. However, they still listened to his orders without the slightest hint of hesitation and pulled back. Nie Yan had been the one who carried them to this point in the run. Thus, they had unwittingly come to acknowledge his ability and held faith in his commands. Chapter 56. Featherfall Jewel. Heaving one of its massive stumps into the air, the Treant King forcefully stamped on the ground.
Va tremple.
BOM.
Like a giant hammer striking the surface, the stump transmitted a powerful force deep into the earth which violently shook the ground. Soon, large fractures began forming on the surface, spreading to the nearby surroundings, appearing as if they would rend the entire world asunder. Then powerful shock waves erupted from the depths, pouring volatile magical energy onto the surface. The frontliners felt their hearts tighten as they witnessed the tyrannical might of this skill because likely then and there, they would have been instantly killed were it not for Nie Yan ordering them to retreat. Furthermore, with their absence and only the ranged units remaining, the team would certainly lack the damage necessary to finish off the boss, leading to a possible wipe as a consequence. Oftentimes, even the slightest of mistakes could reverse the outcome of a battle. Re-engage. The boss doesn't have much health left. Faster everyone, faster.
Nie Yan shouted.
Their next step was to simply finish off the Treant King, then everything would be fine. Besides, with so little health remaining, it couldn't possibly do any more to reverse the situation. Heroic Strike. Radiant Slash. A volley of magic poured into the sky. Bang.
Bang! Bang!
The spells blasted its body, depleting the boss of what little health it had remaining. Upon entering its death throes, the Treant King mournfully moaned as cracks began appearing all over its body. A moment later, boom! An explosion rocked the area as its body splintered into pieces and fell to the ground as a pile of wood debris. The Treant King is dead. We succeeded. All of the team members excitedly cheered. For a team like theirs, clearing this specialist dungeon was simply a remarkable and unimaginable achievement. In the exact moment they toppled the Treant King over, everyone felt like they were in a dream as if everything that happened wasn't real. However, this dream was in fact reality, and an indescribable feeling of admiration arose in their hearts. Before meeting Nie Yan, their team hadn't even been able to clear this dungeon on easy difficulty. Yet while following his lead, they were able to directly beat it on specialist difficulty, truly an inconceivable feat. Seeing everyone's joyous and excited expressions, Nie Yan broke into a smile because he was very much the same when he cleared a dungeon for the very first time. Tang Yao, Yao Yao, Dark Mystery, Yu Lan, Blue Feather, and by Kai Shui, Plain Boiled Water, were among the 8 people who leveled up. Meanwhile, Nie Yan's experience bar had risen to 52%. As one could quite easily tell, the Treant King had given an ample and generous amount of experience. Nie Yan dug through the pile of wood debris. Despite finding 2 pieces of equipment, they weren't the item he was looking for, so he continued his search. He brushed aside the branches and twigs and jolted in elation when a bright blue gem entered his vision. This is exactly what I was looking for. This gem was completely different from ordinary gems. Resembling a diamond, it was carved with many facets and blossomed with a dazzling radiance. He quickly appraised the gem with transcendent insight. Featherfall Jewel. Ah, it's the Featherfall Jewel. I finally have it in my hands. 2 pieces of equipment and a jewel dropped. One of them is a silver-grade hat for arcane mages, and the other is a silver-grade armor for paladins. As for the jewel, I'll be taking it for myself, Nie Yan announced. Even if he wanted to take the equipment, he wouldn't have to pay money. However, the other members had to pay the rest of the team with their bid if they wanted the equipment. At this moment, not a single person raised any objections. The arcane mage hat went to Dusk for the low price of 1 silver and 50 coppers. Thanks to this, he didn't come out of the trip empty-handed. The paladin armor was taken away by Yu Lan for 2 silvers. Since many of the members were part of her team, and its value was divided evenly, most of the money stayed with her team and she only had to pay Dusk, Tang Yao, and Nie Yan a few coppers. What kind of jewel is that? Share the properties with me, Dusk asked. He was rather curious about the jewel in Nie Yan's hands. After all, the only reason the latter ran this specialist dungeon was for the sake of this jewel. Nie Yan shared the Featherfall Jewel's properties. Featherfall Jewel. Dark Gold Ornament. Requirements. Level 0. Properties. Defense 8 to 10, Strength +7. Can be equipped with the accessory slot or embedded into jewelry slot where applicable. Featherfall. Activate to allow the player to fall like a feather through the air. Duration. 3 minutes. Weight. 1 pound. Restrictions. None. Excluding rings, necklaces, and medallions, every player had 5 slots which players could equip accessories. Nie Yan equipped the Featherfall Jewel into one of his accessory slots. So it was a dark gold accessory. No wonder you cared about it so much. Dusk exclaimed in surprise. The properties on this Featherfall Jewel weren't that great, but its Featherfall ability was quite rare. Otherwise, it wouldn't be classified as a dark gold grade. Through this entire run, even if they were to add up all the equipment they received up till now, it still wouldn't be equal in value to the equipment Nie Yan obtained for himself. Some team members felt this was a little unfair. However, they quickly erased this thought and quickly got over it. Without Nie Yan, let alone clearing this specialist dungeon, they wouldn't have even obtained a single hair. How many honor points did your team receive? Nie Yan glanced at Yu Lan and asked. Around 1,200. Thank you. Yu Lan looked at Nie Yan and sincerely thanked him. So much. Even when my team cleared Black Flame Forest, we only received 800, Dusk exclaimed in fright. He began to think specialist difficulty truly wasn't simple. This was merely Treant Forest. If they were to run Black Flame Forest or Agmoda Muddy Wetlands on Specialist, he'd imagine the rewards would definitely be much more generous. You guys can head to Black Flame Forest or Fallen Shaman Camp now. If you haven't gone to those dungeons before, you should take some time to prepare, Nie Yan said. Will you come with us? Yao Yao gazed at Nie Yan and asked. Yu Lan and the rest also perked their ears up while waiting for Nie Yan's reply. However, Yu Lan also understood her team's little temple wasn't big enough for a deity such as Nie Yan to stay in. Nie Yan faintly smiled and said, like I said before, I won't be following you guys to Black Flame Forest. He definitely wouldn't have a pleasant time running a dungeon together with a person like Chen Bo. However, if Yu Lan and the others kicked Chen Bo out of the team, he would think it over. Even then, it was simply thinking it over. He'd have to check whether he had the free time. Oh! Yao Yao felt somewhat disappointed. In a few days, Brother Nie is going with us to run Agmota Muddy Wetlands, Dusk interjected. He was now thoroughly convinced of Nie Yan's ability. Being able to run another dungeon with this expert was truly a wonderful matter for him. Tang Yao gazed at Nie Yan with expectation in his eyes. He wanted Nie Yan to bring him along as well. Nie Yan sent a whisper to Tang Yao, "Your skills aren't there yet. Agmota Muddy Wetlands has very high requirements for mages. You can practice by following Yulan and her group for now. Then when you're good enough, I'll bring you along on the harder dungeon runs." "Alright, I understand." Tang Yao nodded his head. Nie Yan wouldn't lie to him. If he did tag along for Agmota Muddy Wetlands and couldn't keep up, he'd likely lose face for Nie Yan. He calmed himself before resolving to run a few more dungeons with Yulan and her team. That way he could polish up his skills. "How about letting Tang Yao tag along with you guys for Black Flame and Fallen Shaman Camp? As for those dungeons, I can give you guys a bit of advice," Nie Yan suggested. Yulan nodded her head and said, "We're extremely glad to have him. From now on, he'll be part of our team." Tang Yao's magic damage was quite high. His contributions in this run were great as well. For this kind of person to be willing to stay on their team, she couldn't be any happier. Moreover, with Tang Yao here, Nie Yan would definitely give them some advice instead of keeping it from them. With the item distribution finished, besides the Uncanny Dodge skill book, the Forest Necklace, and the Featherfall Jewel, Nie Yan also received 3 silvers. Meanwhile, Tang Yao earned his first large profit and received roughly 60 coppers. Chapter 57. Generous Rewards. "Is there anything we still need to do?" Dusk asked. "Return the flute to Ein Pat," Nie Yan replied. He glanced at Bai Kai Shui, plain boiled water, and said, "Hand the flute to me." At the end of the day, the flute was a quest item and never belonged to him in the first place. Bai Kai Shui inwardly sighed and handed the flute back to Nie Yan. Nie Yan eyed the forest thickets and spotted a decrepit old man walking unsteadily towards them. "Respected senior, we've punished those despicable dark elves and retrieved your flute." "Good. Yes, this is indeed my flute. Thank you, brave adventurers. There'll be no need to navigate the winding and twisting paths on your return. I'll send you all to the exit myself. May the divine bless you." Had Nie Yan and the others tried to keep the flute, they would have incurred Einpat's wrath and likely found themselves in a perilous situation. Ultimately, the Treyant Forest would have become a resting place for their bones. System. Side quest Einpat's missing flute has been completed. You have received 28,596 experience points. Shortly after Nie Yan received this notification, a thick fog emerged and enveloped the team. The elderly Einpat disappeared as well. When the fog finally dissipated and everyone could see clearly again, they discovered they had been returned to the entrance of the forest. "We can still collect another reward by going to the commander in Kalor." Nie Yan glanced at his experience bar. Among his teammates, he received the largest share of the experience because he had contributed the most during Einpat's quest. Moreover, after gaining the experience from the side quest, his experience bar rose to 73%. Everyone was in high spirits. It truly felt great following Nie Yan into a dungeon. After receiving the reward, their experience bars once again rose by a large chunk. After traveling back to Telek Town, the entire team took the transfer point to Kalor. Upon arriving, Nie Yan headed directly for the barracks. Their destination was to the southwest of the city. When they arrived at the outer perimeter of the barracks, they saw tall walls with many sentries posted atop. Overall, it appeared the defenses and security of this place were fairly tight. Nie Yan and his group didn't enter the barracks but rather the lofty white tower that stood beside it. This was the building where Commander Kavrot was stationed. As they entered, the group could see there weren't many NPCs within the building. However, a tall middle-aged man still walked over to greet them. He had a face full of scars and wore the military uniform of the Viridian Empire. Nie Yan used transcendent insight to examine this NPC Commander Kavrot. "Youngsters, what business do you have coming to this place?" "Lord Commander, we caught 2 dark elves lurking inside Treyant Forest. After interrogating them, we received some information that concerns the safety of Hilton Stronghold. Here are the heads of the 2 dark elves we caught." Commander Kavrote followed up with a few more questions while Nie Yan answered accordingly in the formal manner which was standard in player-to-NPC interaction. Afterward, he handed the Dark Elf heads over to Commander Kavrote. System. Side quest, deliver the information, has been completed. System. Your influence in Hilton Stronghold has increased by 11. System. Your influence in Kalor has increased by 11. System. You have received 32,320 experience points. System. You have learned fighting from Commander Kavrote. System. You have gained +2 strength. System. You have received 2 silvers. Some hidden quests gave additional stats as quest rewards. Nie Yan never expected this quest was one of them or to be so lucky as to receive 2 additional points in strength. Each member of the team received decent experience and money as rewards. Meanwhile, Nie Yan's experience bar rose to 97%. As for the 2 silvers he also received as a reward, they simply didn't count for much considering the amount of wealth he already possessed. Rather than grinding mobs, it seemed much easier to level up by doing quests. However, quests were divided into different levels. The higher the difficulty of the quest, the more experience points it would give. For example, relatively simple quests such as gathering animal furs would give very little experience as a reward. While in team quests, the rewards each individual received would be based on their own contribution in the quest. In the case of this quest as well as Einpat's, Nie Yan had contributed the most. Thus he received the most experience, while the other members received much less in comparison. Well, we've handed in the quest, so I should probably get going now, Nie Yan said to Yao Yao, Dark Mystery, and the others. What are you gonna do now after handing in the quest? Yao Yao asked. She was somewhat reluctant to part. Killing monsters and leveling up. However, where I'm going you guys are certainly unable to follow, Nie Yan replied. Since he now had both the Featherfall Jewel and Silk Spinner Ring, there were many places he could try going to. Since he's busy, let's make our team and level up, Dusk suggested. With so many high damage mages on this team, it would be too much of waste if they separated now. Fatty over here has the Meteor spell. It's got good area of effect and is decent at mobbing groups of monsters, so you probably won't be leveling slowly with him on the team, Nie Yan suggested. He was planning to have Tang Yao familiarize himself with the others, so he would no longer have to worry about not being able to find a team. After receiving numerous pointers from Nie Yan over such a long period of time, Tang Yao's skills had soared in proficiency. Though he still couldn't be called an expert, he would have absolutely no problems assisting this team. After all, low-level dungeons and killing mobs generally weren't too challenging for an arcane mage. Meteor. Everyone was surprised. At this point in the game, mages who knew offensive area of effect spells could best be described as being as rare as a phoenix feather. Why didn't we see you use it earlier in the dungeon? Bai Kai Shui asked. Using that skill in the dungeon. Do you think I'm looking to die? Before entering, Nie Yan specifically warned him not to cast Meteor while in the dungeon. Tang Yao had taken this warning very seriously. Therefore he sounded quite blunt and forceful in his reply. All right. Ha ha. Bai Kai Shui awkwardly smiled and scratched his head. Casting large area of effect spells would frequently alert many mobs and build up a lot of aggro at the same time. In such a case, the frontliners wouldn't be able to keep the monsters from getting to the backline. So it turns out he had Meteor. Why are we still wasting our time here? Dusk rubbed his hands together. He was getting a little impatient to see the might of the rare Meteor spell for himself. I'll be taking my leave first then, Nie Yan said goodbye to everyone. Though after seeing Yao Yao's unhappy appearance, he laughed and said, Next time, I'll kill monsters with you guys. How about it? Remember those words because you're not allowed go back on them. Yao Yao widened her eyes, sounding pleasantly surprised. Her bright and colorful smile was as dazzling as the sun. She didn't know why, but she felt like she had known Nie Yan for a very long time despite them only being acquainted for a few days. They seemed to have a sort of unusual familiarity and understanding with each other. Nie Yan laughed and said, Sure. After leaving the group, Nie Yan began walking over to Kalor's auction house. Meanwhile, the others in the group gazed at Nie Yan's departing back. Only when his figure disappeared into the crowded streets did they finally regain their senses. Come on, let's go and train. When Dusk saw Nie Yan disappear into the crowd, he turned around and said, "Yeah, let's head out." As they departed the area, he sent a message to Sleepy Fox. "Captain, take a look at this video. What kind of video? Just watch it, and you'll know. In the lesser werewolf spawn area near Telek Town, a group of players was in the middle of combat. At the front of the group amongst those players was Sleepy Fox. He turned to the warrior nearby and said, "Hold the line for a moment," before retreating from the fight. "All right." As he retreated, several spells whizzed past him and blasted the lesser werewolves behind him. He was currently in the middle of leveling. For Dusk to dare disturb him at this point in time, it would definitely be an important matter. He opened up the video and pressed play and was surprised to discover the person in this video was Nie Yan. His interest was now piqued. Thus, he continued to watch. While he observed Nie Yan and the others killing the mobs, he furrowed his brows. This is Treyant Forest, right? Why do the Treyants have such high health? He was quite knowledgeable in the game. With but a glance, he was easily able to spot something strange about this video. They're running the dungeon on Specialist. Trent Forest on Specialist. Did you guys actually clear it? Sleepy Fox sent a message to Dusk. He was shocked, however, he soon regained his wits. Such crappy equipment, and their team still dared to enter a specialist dungeon? Quite a rare sight indeed. Chapter 58. Clever Use of the Featherfall Jewel. We did clear it, Dusk replied a moment later. His skills with the crossbow are amazing. Sleepy Fox exclaimed in admiration. He was on the part of the video where Nie Yan first began luring the Treyants with the crossbow. Even if one had exceptional skills, accurately firing those 3 bolts in such a short time frame and under such pressure was nearly an impossible feat. Nie Yan's skills were beyond exceptional. The players at present had just entered the game, so in regards to skill, they were a far distance away from Nie Yan. These 3 bolts might be nothing more than a common everyday skill in his former timeline. However, in the eyes of Sleepy Fox, Dusk, and the others, it was no different from the skills of a god. Sleepy Fox had never valued or noticed the importance of a thief during a dungeon run. After all, many teams who lacked one still managed to clear dungeons just fine. Therefore, he never attached any importance to what Nie Yan could do as a thief when he invited him. Though at present, he began to think having a good thief in a dungeon expedition team was somewhat of a significant matter. He had always felt the team was lacking a certain something, yet only now did he realize what it was. What they were lacking was exactly an expert-level thief like Nie Yan. Stone was correct. He really is an expert, Dusk said. Stone's judgment had always been somewhat lackluster, yet this time around. They didn't know how or what, though a good analogy would probably be something like a disabled cat finding a dead mouse, but he somehow managed to invite a godly expert to their team. We should be able to clear Agmota muddy wetlands now. After finishing the video, he understood the phrase, a successful thief can increase the team's survival by 30% or higher, slightly better. This line didn't only apply to 3-player parties nor only 5-player parties. It meant the same with 20-player and even 30-player teams as well. Besides his individual skill, Nie Yan's leadership abilities were certainly commendable too. Were it not for him, Yulan and the others would have found it impossible to pass the dungeon because of their subpar equipment. The moment Nie Yan found out Dusk was part of Holy Empire, he knew the progression of the run would be seen by Sleepy Fox. Therefore, the least he could do was to eliminate some of the doubts in Sleepy Fox's mind. Now that the Featherfall Jewel was in his hands, Nie Yan was reminded of a famous elite monster, Gato the Lion King. He still needed to make quite a few preparations if he wanted to get rid of that overgrown feline. Nie Yan took a stroll around the auction house. Since the demand and selling price of black phenol wasn't bad, many alchemists gathered whatever leftover ingredients they had and concocted it into black phenol to put up on the auction house. At the moment, there were a little over 100 bottles and several dozen recipes for sale. In but a few days the value of these items would soar considerably. However, a few days hadn't arrived yet, so Nie Yan pressed purchase without the slightest hesitation and cleaned the entire auction house out of all its black phenol recipes, and even the ingredients used to create black phenol. After purchasing all of the black phenol and black phenol-related items, Nie Yan sorted by price and bought 9 of the most expensive crossbow quivers up for sale. 2,000 black gold bolts, 3,000 nightmare bolts, and 4,000 tempered poison bolts. Black gold quiver, 1,000 bolts damage plus 12 price, 2 silver. Nightmare quiver, 1,000 bolts damage plus 10 price, 1 silver, 50 copper. Tempered poison quiver, 1,000 bolts damage plus 9 price, 1 silver, 10 copper. These bolts cost Nie Yan a pretty penny. Besides a few players from the larger guilds who were in charge of luring monsters, absolutely no one could bear to use these expensive bolts. Truthfully, even those wealthy guilds would find it a bit too wasteful squandering these bolts on luring monsters. Therefore the demand for these types of bolts wasn't much at all. However, their prices still remained high because they were relatively uncommon. Hence, only ridiculously rich players like Nie Yan would purchase these things. After purchasing the quivers, Nie Yan teleported to Mordor using the transfer point and headed off in the direction of Violet Dream Hills. He went past the town walls and traveled north for roughly 10 or so kilometers before encountering an unbroken chain of mountains. Arriving at the base of one of these mountains, he ran up the path leading to the mountain peak. Upon reaching the peak, he gazed far into the distance and saw an open plain. Due to how high up he was, everything on this plain looked extremely small. He then looked at the landscape directly beneath him, which was nothing but desolate terrain. Standing atop the peak where the wind whistled through the air, he observed the forest of conifers that ran along the mountain range. The trees flowed like the waves in an ocean of green. The peak he stood on top of was roughly several hundred meters above ground. For the average player, it would mean certain death if they tried to jump off this peak. Nie Yan paced back and forth around the peak, occasionally glancing down to examine the landscape directly below. However, he halted upon finding a certain tree situated near the peak's edge. He stood directly under this tree and faced east. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. This should roughly be it. Yep, it's right here. There's no mistaking it. Nie Yan then leaped off the mountain peak. Though his actions stated otherwise, the purpose of making this trip wasn't really so he could commit suicide. It was because the lair of the level 7 elite monster, Gato the Lion King, was located beneath this cliffside. This monster was the field boss who ruled over this desolate terrain, and many unsuspecting players who came to this area to train would find themselves killed by this mighty lion. Gato would respawn within a day if he was killed. Moreover, he had a high probability of dropping the Black Blood set, which consisted of 3 items: cloak, gloves, and shoulder guards. At level 5 silver grade, the set was currently one of the best thief equipment sets in the game, coming second to the Covenant set, which could only be found in the yet-to-be-opened Sazal Valley dungeon. By obtaining the Black Blood set, Nie Yan could at least guarantee that he was fully geared in first-rate equipment. Beside the aforementioned set, Gato also dropped various thief skill books. In Nie Yan's previous life, many players gathered here to hunt Gato the Lion King. Plenty of chaotic battles occurred for the sake of snatching the equipment he dropped. Oftentimes a large expanse of players covered the entire area, so wanting to grab the Black Blood set wasn't a simple matter. While trying to complete the set was even more of an ordeal. This was due to the fact that Gato would also spawn several hundred lions with him each time he respawned. Therefore players needed to clear the surroundings of lions before facing off against the boss safely. However, the numerous ordinary level 7 lions were extremely difficult to deal with as well. The player base at present was too low level. At the very least, it would take 25 level 5 or higher players to hunt Gato. However, those sort of players were few and far between. Moreover, those who were at that level were certainly experts as well. In any case, gathering so many top-ranked players together certainly wouldn't be easy. Let alone Gato, players didn't even dare to come to this area to hunt the ordinary lions. This vicinity was a level 7 monster spawn area, so very few people would come. Even if they did, none of them would be able to reach Gato's lair. This was the reason Nie Yan could feel at ease while carrying out his plan. The wind blew past his hair as he continued descending in altitude. When Nie Yan reached 4/5 of the way to the ground, he activated the Featherfall Jewel skill, whereupon he immediately began slowing down. He felt like he was as light as a feather as his speed slowed down to a steady rate. Under the effect of Featherfall, Nie Yan's falling speed was only somewhat faster than the actual falling speed of a feather. The distance between him and the ground grew increasingly short. He estimated his current altitude at about 20 meters above ground. He shot out a web line from his silk spinner ring which stuck to the rock face and stopped his fall. Now suspended in the middle of the air, he looked below to discover a robust brown lion with a large mane of hair and an imposing royal aura. By coincidence, this lion was also within his firing range. Obviously, this was Gato the Lion King. Nie Yan recalled this was the exact location where he spawned. Perfect. The web line connected to Nie Yan's left hand was firmly secured on the vegetation growing on the rock wall above. His right hand reached into his bag and took out a crossbow. He lined the sights on the lion. Whoosh! 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 The bolts shot out of the crossbow and went in a straight line towards Gato. Chapter 59. Gato the Lion King. Since the majority of the player base was too low level, very few players were able to reach this destination, which led Nie Yan to believe his actions were far from prying eyes. However, unbeknownst to him, in an area not far from the cliff face he overhung, a group of 10 or so players were hunting mobs. The strongest among them reached level 6 while the lowest was level 4. Even their highest level member was still a level lower than these lions, thus none of them dared to penetrate too deeply into Violet Dream Hills. Although they received 300% bonus experience for killing these level 7 lions, it was offset by their numbers. Moreover, their expenditure was too great. In the game's current state, even a single basic health potion was an expensive luxury. Yet they were consuming these potions at a ludicrous rate. Were it not for the fact that their profits were somewhat decent after recently picking up a Leo shield and a few fur pelts, they would have long stopped hunting these high-health hard-to-chew monsters. Bladelight, let's leave after another hour or two. We should have enough lion pelts by then, said the priest to the level 6 fighter at the front of the group. The fighter named Bladelight raised his shield and blocked an incoming lion's attack. Brandishing his sword, he countered with heroic strike and kite the lion as the mages whittled its health away. Once its health fell below a certain point, he finished it off with whirlwind slash. Alright, we'll leave in an hour then. Since we've already got a Leo shield, it'd be perfect if the Leo armor dropped as well. Resplendent Bladelight nodded and replied he unhurriedly collected the items that dropped from the monster's corpse. That's impossible. I read online that the drop rate for Leo armor is 1 in 500, said an elementalist who walked to his side. He and Resplendent Bladelight were the only level 6s in their team. His character was named He Zhua, Black Amazing. The two of them could be counted as experts in the game. Although they were friends, neither was willing to admit they were weaker than the other. In terms of skill, Bladelight was superior, but He Zhua's influence in their guild was higher. Their guild was named Unhindered and was established using both of their names. Since Bladelight wasn't interested in the management aspects of the team or guild, He Zhua naturally took on this role. Under his leadership, not only did Unhindered become a successful guild, it became somewhat famous as well. What? The Leo shield's drop rate is only 1 in 1,000, yet we still managed to get one anyway. Bladelight rebuked. That's only cause you got lucky. He Zhua's complexion paled. Bladelight's tone made him somewhat speechless and angry. However, he still managed to mumble out a few words in reply. If I can equip the Leo armor, I'll have the highest defense out of any player in the game. Bladelight said in a confident tone. Egotistical prick. He Zhua thought in disdain. His expression, however, did not betray his inner thoughts. He and Bladelight, on various occasions, competed in sparring matches in the arena, though the difference between them was clear. Out of 10 matches, it'd be considered amazing if he could even beat Bladelight in 2 of them. Bladelight was famous, quite skilled, and he was well respected among players in several professions. In truth, Unhindered was established solely on his reputation alone. Thus, He Zhua had no choice but to rely on Bladelight. However, as the guild continued to expand, He Zhua's authority over it grew as well. As a result, he was slowly inching out Bladelight in terms of position within the guild. As he and his team prepared to continue their hunt, Bladelight happened to gaze over at the distant cliff face and was surprised to discover a player jumping off its peak. Geez, I'm seeing stranger things by the day. People are even committing suicide in video games. Can't this guy be a little less morbid? However, to his astonishment, that player's falling speed continued to decrease, to the extent where they were unlikely to die even if they hit the ground. Guys, look at the cliff face over there. Blade Light exclaimed in an amazed manner. Why? Heijua asked as he inadvertently looked to the side, whereupon his expression immediately froze. He also noticed Nie Yan. At that moment, he saw Nie Yan shoot out something from his hand and suspend himself in midair, whereupon he took out a crossbow and began firing below. What the heck is doing? The surrounding members stared blankly. Amazing, this guy can even think of a strategy like this. Haven't you guys figured it out? He's killing monsters. Blade Light straightened his back and replied. The player overhanging this cliff deeply interested him. For being able to figure out such a unique method of killing mobs, this certainly wasn't an average player. That item on his hand should be the silk spinner ring. Heijua recognized this item because he was knowledgeable of most equipment in the game. If we also had this silk spinner ring, could we also be like him and hunt monsters like that? No, even if we had that ring, we still wouldn't be able to. Unless we have equipment with the feather fall ability like him, the force of the fall would likely snap the webline, Blade Light replied. The silk spinner ring was already quite a rare accessory that held considerable value. There was even less of a need to discuss equipment with a feather fall ability which happened to be rarer. These two unique items couldn't necessarily be bought even if one did have the money. Yet for the sake of hunting monsters, this person obtained both? Just who the hell was he? Damn! I'd like to be able to kill monsters like that. If I never have to worry about being attacked while firing bolts, I'd be able to rise several levels in no time. Not necessarily. The number of mobs in his range is limited. His leveling speed won't be that high because the mobs don't respawn fast enough at the rate he's killing them. After clearing all the mobs in his range, he'll have no choice but to go back. A somewhat knowledgeable member of the team voiced their opinion. Heijua didn't utter a single word while listening to his teammates' discussion. They couldn't penetrate too deeply into the area because the nearer they approached that cliff, the higher the mob density. Since they didn't dare to get anywhere near that area, they would never know what sort of monsters that player was hunting. Roar! The deafening sound traveled all the way from the cliff face to where they were standing. The surrounding members paled as they all looked on in horror. A robust lion leapt 5 meters into the air and threw itself at the cliff face. The pounce was quite powerful and ferocious, even managing to shake the cliff face on impact. Yet no matter how high that lion leapt, it was far from being able to reach Nie Yan. Its body halted on the cliff face and involuntarily slid off. All the while, Nie Yan dangled calmly in midair and steadily fired more bolts. It's the elite class monster, Gato the Lion King. Heijua shouted, his voice cracking in astonishment. Each member of the group looked at each other in dismay and shock. Gato the Lion King, even if they were to form a 20-player team right now, they still wouldn't be able to kill this lion. Yet this level 7 elite class monster was currently being turned into a pincushion as it was slowly shot to death by a single player overhanging a cliff. When they thought of this, they felt resentment boiling up inside of them, perhaps even more so a feeling of envy and jealousy. Can we rush in and steal the equipment from him after he kills it? One of the members asked.
Impossible.
We simply don't have any means of going there, unless guild leader Heijua can call a bunch of people over here. However, the losses we would suffer far outweigh our potential gains. Forget it then. As Blade Light, Heijua, and the others contemplated, the earth violently trembled. The vibrations they felt on the ground resembled a stampede. Each of their faces paled, and they quickly looked into the distance. What they saw was a giant dust cloud rising into the air and several hundred lions running in their direction. The Lion King's roar had stirred up the lions in the vicinity. We're done for. Everyone, retreat immediately. Heijua shouted in alarm, but it was already too late. The stampede of lions had discovered their presence. At that moment, they were simply awaiting their impending doom. Blade Light realized how difficult it would be to escape, so he raised his shield to welcome the enemies. Meanwhile, the perpetrator of this disaster was hanging leisurely over the cliff face. He didn't need to expend much strength. All he needed to do was steadily fire his crossbow. The bolts that were fired all had the additional property of dealing bonus on hit damage. Even if it was the level 7 Lion King, it still had no more than 5 or 6,000 health. Under his steady fire, it soon had less than half of its health remaining. The Lion King's aggro was fully on Nie Yan, but it was incapable of attacking him. Thus, there was nothing it could do. Since it only knew physical attacks, all of its abilities were related to raising its physical damage. Even when it leapt at its highest, it only reached 6 or 7 meters while its opponent was suspended 20 meters in the air. Killing monsters that surpassed him in level became much simpler with these bolts that dealt bonus on hit damage. Each and every bolt would deal real and genuine damage. Chapter 60. Resplendent Blade Light. Nie Yan specifically chose this location after making certain the Lion King didn't have any ranged attacks. Gato was the boss that resided at this cliff base, and Nie Yan recalled that there were at least 10 other monsters like him. However, Gato happened to be the easiest one to deal with because it only knew physical attacks. Naturally, Nie Yan would choose to challenge the pushover over the others. The Lion King tried every which way to get its claws on Nie Yan. However, as time elapsed, its health eventually fell below 20%, and it entered a berserk state. Its robust and muscular body, though weakened, suddenly filled with energy and unyieldingly pounced at Nie Yan. However, no matter how hard it struggled, all of its efforts were futile in the end. Before another half hour even passed, its health bar fell empty. The Lion King raised its head to the sky and resentfully roared, unwilling to resign to its fate, before collapsing onto the earth. Gato the Lion King, the boss that would be fought over by numerous players in the future, had its life ended just like that. Nie Yan hadn't lost a single drop of health in the process of whittling it to death. Ding! A clear melody rang into the air. He received 800% bonus experience for killing a monster that surpassed him in level. After hitting level 5, his experience bar continued filling up and only stopped upon hitting 36%. The Lion King had dropped 2 pieces of equipment. Both items lay sparkling on the ground beside Gato's corpse. Equipment dropped. Excitement arose within Nie Yan. However, he still couldn't come down. He could see 10 or so lions still roaming around in an area not far from Gato's corpse. In order to retrieve the dropped items safely, he needed to clear them out first. Thus, he continued firing the crossbow until each lion was shot to death. Unlike other games, dropped items never disappeared after a certain amount of time. The game resembled real life, as in items thrown on the ground would never just evaporate into thin air. As for items players didn't need or couldn't sell, they could be broken down into raw materials by the recycler to recoup some of their value. Seeing as there were no monsters left in the area, Nie Yan released the webline and dropped to the ground. After falling 20 meters, he only lost 60 health. This sort of height wasn't enough to kill him with fall damage. Nie Yan walked up to the Lion King's side and collected the 2 pieces of equipment that dropped. Since both items were unappraised, he revealed their properties with transcendent insight. Black Blood Cloak. Gold. Requirements. Level 5. Properties. Defense 19 to 21. Resilience plus 5. MOV. Speed plus 6. Weight, 2 pounds. Restrictions. Thief. Can be equipped by all factions. Lion King's Shield. Gold. Requirement. Level 5. Properties. Defense 39 to 51. Block chance plus 12%. Resilience plus 5. Magic resist plus 7. Weight. 10 pounds. Restrictions. Fighter. Paladin. Can be equipped by all factions. Nie Yan felt quite satisfied when he saw that a piece of equipment from the Black Blood set had dropped, though he didn't expect the Lion King's shield to drop as well. Its value was much higher than the Black Blood cloak. To illustrate a point, if he brought it to the marketplace, he absolutely wouldn't sell it for anything less than 20 silvers. In the best-case scenario, he could exchange it for a couple pieces of thief equipment. The price for a fighter's shield remained high in the marketplace, always occupying the top positions in terms of price. Out of the 10 most expensive pieces of equipment sold in the marketplace, 8 were fighter shields. What a good piece of equipment! Along with the Black Blood cloak, I've made a decent profit. Nie Yan stored the shield and cloak into his bag. I'm finally level 5. Nie Yan glanced at his stat page. Due to the chapter of Courage's effect, he gained 2 additional stat points and 1 additional mastery point upon reaching level 5, meaning he had a total of 7 stat points and 2 mastery points to allocate. He allocated 2 points in strength and 5 in dexterity. Since intermediate marksman couldn't be improved any further at his current level, he distributed his 2 mastery points into dagger and dual wielding. As a result, he gained a 10% attack bonus along with increased proficiency in wielding daggers. Moreover, he could at long last dual wield weapons. Nie Yan brought out all the level 5 equipment he had been carrying with him just for this occasion. After switching out all his level 0 equipment, he glanced at his character info. Main weapon, Horn Dagger, Bronze. Secondary weapon, Assassin's Decree, Gold. Armor, Headhunter's Silver Leather Armor, Silver. Cape, Black Blood Cloak, Gold. Boots, Boots of Swiftness, Gold. Nie Yan's upgraded equipment drastically changed his appearance. The Headhunter's Silver Leather Armor, with its dull silver-white luster, gave off a chilly aura of slaughter and death. From his back hung a dark, blood-red cloak that emitted a faint golden glow. In addition, the pair of daggers he held in his hands flickered with a cold glint. The style of thief equipment was generally reserved compared to other classes, and Nie Yan had also concealed the equipment's visual effects, but from a quick glimpse, one could still discern that his equipment was out of the ordinary. Nie Yan became much faster with his level 5 equipment. He moved like the wind, leaving afterimages behind him. Not bad, he muttered to himself. He felt quite satisfied with his new equipment. In this period of time where good equipment was still scarce, his own equipment would cause the overwhelming majority of players to look at him in admiration. This new equipment would enable him to freely roam around any level 6 or 7 monster area as he pleased. Nie Yan would need to wait a day for Gato to respawn, so he began heading out of Violet Dream Hills. His next objective was the level 8 elite class monster Ogre Devourer, who resided in an area not far from this one. The loot the Ogre Devourer dropped was also rather decent, as it dropped items for every class. In his past life, there was even a player who'd obtained a piece of dark gold thief equipment. Of course, the drop rate for equipment of this grade was extremely low. The Ogre Devourer was also a monster that took a day to respawn. Nie Yan made sure to carefully avoid the lions as he left the area. Moving forward, he heard a rustling sound coming from a nearby bush. Nie Yan looked over just in time to see a fighter clad in white armor with an ashen silver greatshield in his hand leap out of the bush and come running in his direction. Just moments later, 3 lions also emerged from the bush and pounced after the fighter. That fighter's footsteps were steady and unhurried. However, his situation was a little unfavorable, as his health was running low and the lions' attacks became increasingly ferocious. Intimidate! The fighter's sudden and explosive roar startled the lions and halted their movements for a brief moment. Taking advantage of this small opening, he followed with tendon break and targeted the closest of the 3 lions before rapidly pulling back. The lion struck by tendon break temporarily entered a crippled state. The 2 other lions fiercely growled and leapt into the air, pouncing on the fighter. The fighter retaliated with heroic strike, striking one of the lions and repelling it. He then firmly raised his shield to meet the other lion's attack. Even for a level 6 fighter, it was still quite difficult to deal with 3 level 7 lions while low on health. Nie Yan had activated stealth the moment the fighter appeared and blended in the background. Instead of leaving, he idled around the fighter. If Nie Yan were to take advantage of the situation and act, the fighter would undoubtedly die. However, he still held some reservations. Judging by the other party's firm and collected movements, he could tell with a single glance that they were an expert. He was currently contemplating whether it was worth becoming enemies with this expert over a single piece of equipment. In the end, he decided it was best to wait for the 3 lions to kill this expert first. After all, when 2 sides fought, it would always be the third party that benefited the most. As for saving this person, Nie Yan had no interest in such an idea. He had been in too many situations where the person he saved repaid his kindness with malice. In this world, everyone fought for their own interests, so it was necessary for him to learn how to be cold-hearted. Since this person dared to come to this area, they were presumably not weak. Nie Yan examined this fighter with transcendent insight. Resplendent blade light. Level 6 fighter. Nie Yan raised an eyebrow after reading this player's name. He knew almost all the players who rose to fame in Kalor, even if they held just a little bit of reputation. Naturally, this resplendent blade light was no exception. Chapter 61. Favor. How could it be him? Nie Yan muttered to himself. Though he had no dealings with resplendent blade light, he still recognized this name because it was quite influential in his past life. Blade light held impressive renown as he stood amongst the top 3 fighters in the game. That said, the rankings were an inadequate indicator of their strength due to the minuscule gap between him and his 2 rivals. This made it near impossible for others to determine who truly reigned supreme. Therefore, despite not being the absolute strongest, Blade Light was still a celebrity Nie Yan had heard of. Now that Nie Yan thought about it, he seemed to recall there was a story surrounding resplendent Blade Light. It was about one of his friends, an elementalist named He Zhua, Black Amazing. The two, who jointly established a guild named Unhindered, were considered the closest of friends. However, Blade Light didn't care much for managing Unhindered, so full authority over the guild eventually fell to He Zhua. Later on, Blade Light found out his girlfriend was having an affair with He Zhua while he, of course, had absolutely no clue this had been occurring. He was a proud and arrogant person, so how could he bear this sort of humiliation? In retaliation, he brought many of his brothers away and left the guild. From then on, Unhindered separated into 2 factions with irreconcilable differences. As for what happened after, Blade Light could be considered a hero of sorts. He kept to his promises, valued loyalty, and was well respected among other players. Moreover, no one disputed his position as one of the top 3 fighters in the game. Hence, without Blade Light, Unhindered went on a continual decline and eventually degenerated into a second-rate guild. As Blade Light resisted the 3 lions, he felt a cold chill run down his spine and a peculiar sensation arose in his heart. He steadily retreated as he fought, occasionally glancing behind to look around, yet he saw nothing but empty space. However, his instincts would never betray him. He knew this odd feeling came from the gaze of a thief. Even with 6 points in awareness, he was still unable to locate the other party's position. This isn't an ordinary thief. Brother, since you're already here, why don't you show yourself? My name is Resplendent Blade Light. If you've decided to attack, I won't attempt to struggle since I'm done for in any case. However, if you're willing to save me, you'll have my thanks. In addition, I'll even swear on my name that I'll remember this favor. Blade Light spoke in a clear tone. At the same moment, the lion that had been left behind recovered from its crippled state and joined back with its 2 companions. All 3 pounced forward and intensified their assault.
Ho!
I didn't think he'd be able to notice me. Nie Yan pondered for a short while. He would only obtain a single piece of equipment if he killed Blade Light. The equipment he'd acquire wasn't for his class, and its value wasn't something he highly regarded. In contrast, being owed a favor by a top-tier fighter held much greater appeal than a single piece of equipment. Moreover, from his previous life, he knew Blade Light was known for being a trustworthy person. The lights and shadows in the background blurred, followed by a figure emerging into sight roughly 3 meters from Blade Light. Nie Yan had emerged. He lowered his body and swiftly struck one of the lions with a sweeping kick. Concussive blow. The blade of his daggers flashed with a cold glint. Among the 3 lions, the one he struck with concussive blow was low on health. Nie Yan chained his prior attack with assassinate followed by vital strike and instantly killed the lion, whereupon he drew back immediately and pulled out a crossbow. Whoosh! 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 3 bolts shot out of the crossbow and pierced the air. Put. -37. -38. -32. Nie Yan's attacks caused the 2 remaining lions to switch aggro. They turned around and pounced on him. Taunt. Blade Light knew that at this moment, his best course of action was to support Nie Yan. His taunt came at just the right time. The lions stiffened mid-pounce and the aggro switched back to him. Whoosh! 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 Nie Yan fired his crossbow once more and 3 bolts shot through the air. Put. The lion that was already low on health from being struck earlier died after the second round of bolts. Nie Yan withdrew his crossbow and pounced toward the remaining lion. Cleave. Blade Light leapt high into the air and struck the remaining lion. The attack ensured its attention was fixated fully on him while Nie Yan circled round its back and released a flurry of attacks. -52. -50. -51. Thieves dealt 30% more damage when attacking an enemy from behind. A brief moment later, the lion went limp and collapsed to the ground. Blade Light felt a mix of shock and relief when he saw Nie Yan's nimble movements and high damage. What a strong thief! Just a moment ago, if he had decided to attack me instead, I'd have zero chance of survival. Nie Yan walked up to the 3 lion corpses and searched around. To his disappointment, nothing had dropped. Well, that's settled. Too bad nothing dropped. Anyway, if you plan on keeping your promise, this means you owe me one now. My name is Nie Yan, Nirvana Flame, Nie Yan said, examining Blade Light. He appeared to be near his mid-20s. He also looked mature and rugged, giving off the impression of someone who could be relied on and trusted. I, Resplendent Blade Light, am a man of my word. I'll remember this favor. In the future, just call if you need me. As long as it's within my capabilities, I'll do my best to lend a helping hand, Blade Light replied in a straightforward manner. He wasn't the type of person who backed out on his promises. Blade Light then glanced at Nie Yan's face and was shocked at his immature appearance. He never thought this thief would be so young. He only looked to be 18 or 19 years old. Moreover, he didn't think Nie Yan would appear in this area for no rhyme or reason. Presumably, the player he had seen earlier, suspended over the cliff face and shooting the Lion King, was Nie Yan. Why did you come here all by yourself?
Nie Yan asked.
It was quite dangerous for a lone fighter to burst into a high-level monster area. Thieves might not have a problem coming here, but that was only because they could avoid danger by activating stealth. I entered this area in a party with my friends, but we got separated when we met a large group of lions. I'm the only one remaining. Everyone else died. I was constantly fending off those lions, and there was never a chance for me to use a return scroll. If it weren't for my high health and defense, I would have likely died as well, Blade Light replied in a calm manner. However, Nie Yan could imagine how bitter and desperate of a situation he had been in. I guess you're lucky then. You're right. I am pretty lucky for being able to somehow survive. How about we add each other as friends? Resplendent Blade Light is too much of a mouthful. You can just call me Blade Light. Nie Yan accepted Blade Light's friend request. His new friend was a powerful fighter, which was worth being happy over. At least from now on, he'd no longer have to worry about finding a good tank when running a dungeon. This isn't a safe place for you to idle around. It's best for you to hurry up and return to town, Nie Yan suggested. If a pride of lions were to catch sight of them, he could still easily escape, but Blade Light was different. He had no way to hide himself. Moreover, with his large build and bulky equipment, he'd likely become a free meal for the lions in this area. For Blade Light, these words weren't pleasant to the ears, but he had no means to refute them. Besides the fact Nie Yan seemed to be much stronger than him, fighters couldn't compete with thieves when it came down to survivability. All right then, I'll leave. I owe you a favor, so if you ever need me, just send a message. As long as it's within my capabilities, I'll try my best to help. Blade Light nodded his head and retrieved a return scroll from his bag. It really wasn't safe for him to stay here for too long. Wait a second! Nie Yan shouted, stopping Blade Light just when he prepared to activate the scroll. His impression of Blade Light was quite good. What's the matter? I have a shield that you might want. I don't mind selling it to you if you can give me a decent price, Nie Yan said. It would be too much of a pity selling this shield through the auction house. If an acquaintance could afford it, he might as well sell it to that acquaintance instead. Either way, by selling the shield, he'd have more money to do other things. Huh. Let me take a look at it. Blade Light seemed quite interested. Nie Yan was the person who suspended himself over the cliff face to kill the Lion King. To be able to use such an ingenious method of hunting a boss, he was certain to have good equipment. Chapter 62, Ogre. Nie Yan placed the Lion King's shield inside the trade window. This shield should be worth over 20 silvers, but I don't mind selling it for only 20. This dropped from the Lion King when you killed it? Bladelight was left shaken after examining the shield's properties. He couldn't even begin to imagine how much better the Lion King's shield was in comparison to his own. In fact, there really was no comparison. The two weren't even on the same level. Nie Yan furrowed his brows. How did Bladelight know he killed the Lion King? Seeing Nie Yan's reaction, Bladelight hurriedly explained, "Oh, my apologies. It seems I got a bit too excited. However, you can rest assured that I won't leak this information." Then, he returned his gaze to the shield. This Lion King's shield really is worth over 20 silvers. If it were to appear in the marketplace, it definitely wouldn't sell for less than 25 silvers. Unfortunately, I don't have that kind of money on me right now. Would you be willing to wait for me to scrape up enough funds after returning to the city?
Sure.
I can wait, Nie Yan replied, nodding his head.
Oh.
I also have a few pieces of thief equipment in my personal storage. Several of them are pretty decent, and some of them should hold your interest. Would you be interested in exchanging them in place of money? Bladelight asked. As long as I can use them, I'm fine with it, Nie Yan replied. He had actually been worrying about being unable to find good thief equipment, so Bladelight's suggestion came at the perfect moment. All right then. I'll contact you after I collect the money. Please don't sell the shield to anyone before then. Bladelight felt tense and anxious as he stared the Lion King's shield in Nie Yan's hand. Nie Yan thought for a moment before he replied, "I'll wait a day. If you're not able to raise enough money by then, I can only look elsewhere to sell." Out of the people he had frequent contact with, only Bai Kai Shui, plain boiled water, from Yu Lan's Blue Feather Team was a fighter. However, it was highly unlikely, if not impossible, that Bai Kai Shui could afford the 20 silvers he wanted for the shield. Nie Yan felt a little hesitant, putting the shield up in the auction house. He'd much rather keep the fertile waters flowing in his own fields. After all, it was more beneficial to give such equipment to his acquaintances rather than strangers. "One day is enough," Bladelight promptly replied. He was a straightforward person and didn't haggle over the shield's price because he understood he had already received a great bargain. Normally, if it was sold to someone else, such a shield wouldn't sell for any bid less than 25 silvers. For it to sell for 30 silvers or higher was a reasonable albeit unlikely possibility as well. Nevertheless, 20 silvers was still a significant sum. Seems that I'll have to borrow some money. Filled with excitement and anticipation, Bladelight activated the return scroll so he could raise the funds he needed in the city. "Oh, there's one other matter. Is He Zhua, Black Amazing, your friend?"
Nie Yan asked.
After thinking it over, he still felt it was best to warn Bladelight. The type of people he detested the most were two-faced backstabbers. He Zhua and Bladelight were friends. Yet the former still chose to have an affair with the latter's girlfriend. This sort of behavior, Nie Yan truly found it condemnable. "Yes, he is. How did you know?" Bladelight asked, a hint of bewilderment mixed in his tone. "I've heard many unpleasant rumors surrounding what kind of person he is. A little incident happened between him and one of my friends. My friend met him and a woman called Nie Yan, beautiful Angelica, at Midnight Charm at Calor, and they got into a scuffle." Nie Yan glimpsed at Bladelight's expression. In his previous life, this bar was where Bladelight discovered his girlfriend and He Zhua were committing acts of adultery. Nie Yan didn't mind exposing He Zhua's deeds at an earlier date. Sure enough, after listening to Nie Yan's words, Bladelight's complexion slightly paled. Nie Yan was his girlfriend whom he met online. Later on, they met each other in real life and had been living together since. If she and He Zhua really were committing indecent acts within the game, it would truly be difficult for him to find out. He Zhua and Nie Yan were the most trusted people in his life. He didn't believe this was true. No, he wasn't willing to believe it could be true. Yet, deep in his heart, he felt a hint of uncertainty and restlessness. Could it be what he's saying is actually? No. Bladelight shook his head. It's absolutely impossible. If I ever meet He Zhua, it won't be on friendly terms. Of course, It'll have nothing to do with you. Nie Yan was only warning him out of the kindness of his heart. Regardless, he wasn't the one being cuckolded. If there comes a day where you plan on leaving unhindered, come and find me. I'd be happy to have you by my side. Nie Yan said all that he wanted to say. He turned around and began walking into the distance. I'll never leave unhindered, Bladelight coldly replied. He convinced himself Nie Yan was just another one of those people trying to poach members for their guild. Truthfully, Nie Yan really did have the intention of recruiting him. After all, it would be a great boon for him to successfully pull Bladelight to his side. However, this little setback was of no matter. He had never hoped for immediate results. His goal was already accomplished. A seed of doubt had been planted deep within Bladelight's heart. Sooner or later, as it slowly germinated, he would one day at last catch whiff of what was being done behind his back. And at that moment, once he realized his short-sightedness, he'd recall Nie Yan's invitation. This much was enough. Nie Yan didn't bother explaining. He activated stealth and disappeared from Bladelight's view. Nie Yan was currently dashing through Violet Dream Hills. At the base of a mountain in the distance, he could see an enormous tree several dozen meters in height. It would take at least 7 full-grown men to link their arms around this tree, and its immense treetop resembled a roof blocking out the sun. Such a landmark seemed especially lofty when placed within Violet Dream Hills. The boss frequently roamed around the vicinity. Therefore, there was no set position where it could be found. If one were unlucky or careless, they would end up encountering it by accident. Unlike Gato the Lion King, the Ogre Devourer wasn't as well known, and the items it dropped were a bit worse. Add on the fact that its skin was coarse and thick while its health was high, many players would find it very difficult to deal with. Furthermore, it possessed a skill named Petrifying Gaze which had the effect of paralysis. Average players were advised to keep as far away as possible if they encountered this boss. Nie Yan neared the giant tree as he passed through some thickets. His cloaking stat wasn't low. Thus, once he hid in the background, even if he wasn't in stealth, he wouldn't be so easily discovered by monsters or players. Amid the sounds of leaves rustling in the wind, Nie Yan also heard distant footsteps. Finally! The Ogre Devourer is coming. Nie Yan dashed towards the immense tree at the end of the forest which was roughly 80 meters away. Near the large tree, there were 6 other smaller trees. They were also thick and sturdy. Roughly 2 grown men were required for their arms to surround a single tree. He decided on these several trees as the location for his ogre hunt. As he arrived near the source of the sound, which also happened to be in the direction of the immense tree, he gradually recalled the incident that prompted him to head to this area. Before he reincarnated, after the servers had been open for over 2 years, a level 5 thief single-handedly killed the level 8 elite class monster, Ogre Devourer. Despite the player base having outgrown this boss, such an unprecedented event had still caused quite a stir. Chapter 63, Art of Weaving. An enormous figure entered Nie Yan's sight after 10 or so seconds. It stood at an evident twofold the height of an ordinary ogre while it spanned a much greater width. This was the Ogre Devourer. Nie Yan hid behind a tree with one of his knees on the ground. He retrieved his crossbow, holding it up with his left hand while his right gripped the trigger. He gazed forward and aligned the crossbow sight with his target. A level 5 thief had killed the Ogre Devourer with a crossbow by chipping away its health. Nie Yan had to admit, that person must have been quite courageous. Nonetheless, if they were to compare, Nie Yan wouldn't lose to this thief in any aspect. There was absolutely no doubt he too could accomplish this feat. After all, he was a great thief who had been on the cusp of becoming a shadow dancer. He reckoned the shadow dancers in his era could also do the same. Nie Yan had a thorough understanding of the process used to whittle the Ogre Devourer to its death. Nevertheless, the execution was still going to be a challenge. In his past life, that thief had killed the boss without a hitch, but his success was partially attributed to luck. Through the sight, the figure of the Ogre Devourer drew increasingly near. Nie Yan redirected his aim to a certain area on the boss chest, its weak point, the heart. He held his finger on the trigger and prepared to launch a few bolts. However, out of nowhere, 2 common ogres entered his line of sight. They were roaming in the vicinity of the boss. Nie Yan stopped himself from pulling his trigger finger and paused for a moment. Though there was a sudden introduction of two unknown variables, whether they could influence the success of his plan remained to be seen. The ogres are big and clumsy. I should be fine as long as I don't get hit. That said, it still isn't an easy task to shave their health down without receiving any damage. Raising his crossbow once more, Nie Yan took aim at the ogre devourer. Whoosh! 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 With the pull of the trigger, 3 bolts shot out, aimed directly at the devourer's heart. The 3 bolts whistled in the air. Put! Put! As if the bolts had struck thick bark, hard muffled sounds rang out. Ogre Devourer, Elite Level 8. Health, 6,000/6,000. Although this boss didn't deal as much damage as the others, it made up for it with high health and thick skin. Either way, the Ogre Devourer certainly wasn't easy pickings. Due to its strong defense, normal crossbow bolts dealt limited damage. Nie Yan's current attack only enabled him to deal 2 to 3 points of damage at most using normal bolts. Fortunately, he had bought those special bolts which dealt on hit true damage. One of those bolts would take out at least 15 health, which was quite impressive. The Ogre Devourer turned around in the direction of its assailant. It lumbered forward and moved towards Nie Yan while brandishing its large wooden club. The Devourer's heavy 5-ton body resembled a humanoid fortress as each of its steps caused tremors in the earth. Seeing that he had successfully aggroed the boss, Nie Yan dashed towards a nearby tree and chose a path with denser vegetation. The Ogre Devourer was awkward and clumsy, and it seemed as if it were running slowly due to its large build. However, its large strides covered quite a bit of distance, and it was actually closing the gap as it chased Nie Yan. The other 2 ogres could also be seen following the Ogre Devourer from the rear, though it soon became apparent that they weren't going to catch up. They continued trailing further and further behind. After running for about 50 meters, Nie Yan degrowed the Ogre Devourer because it wasn't able to catch him. It turned around and looked as if it wanted to depart. However, Nie Yan turned around and shot 3 more bolts at it before dashing off again. After being attacked again, the Ogre Devourer re-aggroed onto Nie Yan and chased him with renewed zeal. While running, Nie Yan noticed only the Devourer was chasing him. The other 2 ogres had long stopped chasing and were now wandering around in a distant area. I guess my luck isn't bad. It'll be much easier dealing with the Ogre Devourer alone. The boss gradually closed the distance, and only 20 meters separated them. As it chased Nie Yan, the Ogre Devourer began emanating a dangerous aura. Its 4 eyes suddenly turned red, and its body radiated a scorching light like a cartoon bomb on the verge of exploding. The 2 pairs of eyes locked onto Nie Yan. Petrifying gaze. Nie Yan felt his chest tighten when he noticed the Ogre Devourer's abnormal behavior. These types of monsters that could lock the player down were especially terrifying. If one were careless for just a moment, that player would find themselves unable to even budge an inch. In the same moment the Ogre Devourer used Petrifying Gaze, Nie Yan rolled out of the way and ducked behind a tree. Miss. The Ogre Devourer roared in anger when it failed to hit its target. It strode forward and covered a large distance with each step while it charged at Nie Yan. The 2 ogres behind it were also alerted. However, after only a few meters, they turned around and began wandering around again. Nie Yan sucked in a deep breath of air while he hid behind the tree. The information he previously read in a guide was correct. After attacking the Ogre Devourer twice, it would use Petrifying Gaze 6 seconds later. If a player was struck, they would become frozen for 6 seconds, incapable of any movement. At present, the only method of dodging Petrifying Gaze was to get behind cover before the skill activated. Furthermore, the player couldn't be a second late. In the event that the skill hit Nie Yan, the Ogre Devourer would have caught up and smashed him to death with its giant wooden club. This was the reason why it was considered extremely difficult soloing the Ogre Devourer. Not just anyone could accomplish this task. Even long after the video of it being killed had been published, it still remained as one of the toughest early game bosses to contend against. Whoosh! 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 Nie Yan fired another round of bolts. He nimbly traversed between the trees and fired the crossbow from time to time. Crash! 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 The Ogre Devourer continued brandishing its club. Each swing proved fruitless since trees were all they struck. The key point in killing this boss revolved around making sporadic movements while traversing past obstacles. Although its running speed wasn't slow in spite of its immense size, it was rather lacking in agility. An excellent thief could take advantage of this weakness by circling around several large trees, making it so that the ogre devourer would miss its attacks. However, this strategy was not one that could be pulled off well by anyone. If the player lacked spatial awareness, couldn't properly judge the ogre devourer's movements, or carelessly got hit by petrifying gaze, they'd likely be sending their lives to the boss. In order to avoid being caught, the player had to always run in a curve and never in a straight line. They also couldn't stop moving for more than 3 seconds. With so many years of combat experience supporting him, many actions became instinctive and ingrained on the deepest level, enabling him to easily fire the crossbow while smoothly navigating the terrain. Seeing as the ogre devourer wasn't too difficult to deal with, Nie Yan felt much more relaxed. His nimble body weaved between the large trees while he fired the crossbow between the gaps. The boss had no way of dealing with Nie Yan. Unable to figure out how to catch him, its 2 heads turned in every direction, eventually getting dizzy and confused. With top-quality gear and 10 years of experience, if he couldn't even match that level 5 thief in his past life, he shouldn't have even bothered playing this game. Put. The bolts nailed themselves into the ogre devourer's skin. Its health was gradually being chipped away as it repeatedly roared and brandished its club, smashing it at Nie Yan. Crash! The club smacked the large tree. Nie Yan had leapt backwards and avoided the attack. It was unable to harm even a single hair on his body. Chapter 64. Slow Death. Whoosh! 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 Another 3 bolts pinned themselves on the ogre devourer, eliciting furious roars that brought over 2 normal ogres. Now this was a bit troubling. Nie Yan glimpsed at the ogre devourer's health bar only a third remained after 30 minutes. If he put aside this sub-elite monster to deal with the normal ogres, its health would return to full, and his work would go to waste. Whatever. Finish it off first. Nie Yan accelerated his rate of fire as the 2 normal ogres joined into the battlefield. The pressure he felt rose precipitously. There was no end to the 3 monsters' pursuit. They made attempts to surround and kill him, but they underestimated his agility. He was as slippery as a loach. Through the gaps between several large trees, he shot bolts that seemingly came from nowhere. An enraged roar came from the ogre devourer's throat, and it swung its enormous club at Nie Yan, but the swipe could not reach him. The 2 normal ogres weren't of any help to the ogre devourer, either due to Nie Yan's meticulous pathing. Not only that, they even became obstructions. Every time it attempted to move, there were 2 ogres blocking its way like brainless pigs. Nie Yan was unperturbed by his perilous surroundings. When he prepared to fire another round of bolts between the trees with one knee on the ground, the ogre devourer's eyes suddenly emitted another dark red light. Shit! It's petrifying gaze again. Nie Yan put away his crossbow and rolled under the cover of the trees. Miss. Nie Yan now had a greater understanding of petrifying gaze after successfully avoiding the skill 3 times. He'd be able to dodge so long as he hid behind a tree when it started casting. Before he even found his footing, however, a massive shadow loomed from above. One of the 2 ogres had circled behind Nie Yan, avoiding his detection entirely, and its enormous club strewn with nails smashed down. Nie Yan didn't have the slightest thought of staying still. He threw himself forward, out of the club's range of attack. Boom! The impact left a small pit and sent fragments of stone and dirt into the air. Nie Yan had no issues imagining his fate if he had delayed by even a second. The knockback effect from the ogre's attack would have sent him flying. Disastrous consequences would occur during the 2 seconds it'd take to travel through the air, fall to the ground, and climb back up. Nie Yan regained his stability, but much to his surprise, he had been surrounded by the 3 ogres during that time. With their clubs raised high into the air, the ogre devourer and 2 normal ogres approached steadily. I'm done for. It seems that this is the end of the line. Such an accident was beyond his expectations. He swept his gaze over the surroundings. His path had been completely sealed by several large trees and the 3 ogres. There was no escape in sight. The ogre devourer bellowed and a deafening roar reverberated through the forest. It raised its club, then slammed it down at Nie Yan. Within the blink of an eye, a spiked club covered his entire field of view. He could even see the individual nails embedded in the wood. Nie Yan tried retreating. However, the two ogres flanked him from behind. His situation couldn't be any direr, and his heart felt like it was going to burst out his chest. In the brief moments before his seemingly imminent demise, he happened to notice the branches in the tree above. They were roughly 8 meters from the ground and flourished with leaves of a vibrant green. However ordinary they were, they seemed like an extension of a holy tree. There. Nie Yan leapt to the side, slipping away from the Ogre Devourer's club. He put full force into his legs and jumped, simultaneously shooting a line of webbing from the silk spinner ring. The power of his jump brought him 3 meters in the air, while the silk spinner ring ejected a line of webbing of roughly 5 meters length. The line of webbing shot through the gaps between the leaves and stuck on the branches. He was suspended in the air, but with a nearby foothold, he leapt up again and flew past the Ogre Devourer's head. Boom! 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 3 clubs smashed onto Nie Yan's position, sending dirt and pebbles scattering into the air. However, no blood nor flesh stained the ground. All 3 ogres' attacks struck naught but air and earth. Their dazed expressions revealed their confusion. Upon landing, Nie Yan bolted to build up some distance. He stopped between 2 trees and knelt. With his right hand supporting the crossbow and his left finger over the trigger, he shot 3 bolts. Put. Although the Ogre Devourer had briefly lost its target, the oncoming attack prompted it to turn its head towards Nie Yan, whereupon it raised its club and charged. Contrary to expectations, Nie Yan did not stop shooting, even when the Ogre Devourer had approached. Seeing as the enormous club was about to crush him, Nie Yan didn't dare to hesitate. He rolled to the side and evaded the Ogre Devourer's attack. Its health had already been dropping quickly, and since Nie Yan now intensified his assault, the Ogre Devourer would soon fall. Only 40 or so health remained. Nie Yan circled to the Ogre Devourer's back and withdrew his crossbow. He unsheathed his dagger and pounced at this sub-elite monster. Vital Strike. Lacerate. Taking advantage of the few moments the Ogre Devourer took to turn its head, Nie Yan's dagger left deep gashes on its back and scarlet blood stained the air and earth. Nie Yan's new set of equipment raised his attack significantly. In addition to the extra 30% given to a thief when striking monsters from the back, he dealt fairly impressive damage. As it felt a sharp pain shoot up from its back, the Ogre Devourer waved its club and let out a miserable roar. Due to his honed reflexes, Nie Yan ducked his head as he could sense an object quickly flying towards his head. A giant club swiped over his head, only missing by a hair's breadth. Phew! Too close. He raised his dagger and struck the Ogre Devourer's chest with assassinate. At last, the final sliver of its health dwindled away. A short stagger, then its colossal figure collapsed. Dust rose into the air and gently floated amidst the thunderous noise. From the side, the 2 remaining ogres charged towards Nie Yan. He quickly fished the items from the Ogre Devourer's corpse and backed away swiftly before he retrieved his crossbow and fired rapidly while darting between the trees. The normal ogre's strengths weren't all that noteworthy, nor were their health points even close to the Ogre Devourer's. So, when facing the assault of Nie Yan's fire, they both fell to the ground in quick succession. The party of ogres was now dead, finally allowing Nie Yan a brief respite. Another field boss down. If it weren't for such an ingenious method of killing monsters, there was absolutely no chance Nie Yan, with such a great disparity in levels, could have challenged that sub-elite monster and come out alive. This was the culmination of countless players' knowledge in his past life. He glanced at his experience bar. It had risen greatly once again. The Ogre Devourer had thick skin, high health, strong attacks, and a special ability, Petrifying Gaze. As a result of all those factors, the experience received was naturally a generous amount. By killing the Ogre Devourer, Nie Yan received a 10-fold experience bonus as a reward. His experience bar rose by 37%, and he was now level 5 with nearly 3/4 of his experience bar filled. Nie Yan had only killed 1 elite monster and 1 sub-elite monster, Gato the Lion King and the Ogre Devourer respectively, yet the amount of experience other players obtained after grinding for several days could not even come close to what he received from those 2 monsters. His level was rising like a rocket. One would never feel greater satisfaction in grinding normal monsters than killing elite monsters levels above themselves. Unfortunately, there were quite few elite creatures that could be killed by using terrain bugs or special techniques, and since elite monsters had quite a long respawn rate, Nie Yan could only take this slowly. Chapter 65. Crossbow of Blood. Nie Yan would have to wait until tomorrow for Gato the Lion King and the Ogre Devourer to respawn. As for leveling, his speed was already sufficiently quick, so there was no need to grind normal monsters. With the time remaining, he could do some small businesses on the side. The Ogre Devourer dropped a total of 2 items, both of which were rather decent. Crossbow of Blood. Gold single-handed crossbow. Requirements. Level 5. Properties. Attack plus 11. 10% armor piercing effect. Triple shot. Shooting speed. 16. Deviation 3%. Restriction. None. Staff of Moonlight Worship. Gold. Requirements. Level 5. Properties. Attack 32 to 38. Level 3 Holy Explosion. 20% extra damage against demons. Restriction. Holy Mages. Can only be equipped by a member of the Righteous Faction. Nie Yan had challenged the high-level elites alone and had successfully defeated them despite the level gap. As such, the chances of receiving additional drops were multiplied and reasonably. The system's rewards were especially munificent. Nie Yan had acquired 4 pieces of gold-tier equipment by now, and every single piece was extraordinary, the Crossbow of Blood particularly. It brought a great surprise to him. The 10% armor-piercing effect was fairly decent. When compared to such a substantially superior crossbow, the one in Nie Yan's current possession was of such a poor quality that there was absolutely no need to hesitate in switching. When comparing goods, there would always be one inferior. The crossbow bought from the NPC had finished its quest. It had served him well, and its times of glory were now coming to an end. Thus, Nie Yan equipped the Crossbow of Blood. As for the old one, it should still fetch some money on the auction. It had a price tag of 37 copper coins when he bought it, so its resale value should be some dozen copper coins. Nie Yan returned to Kalor, having finished examining the new equipment he acquired. There were quite a few people within the city, but the vast majority of players had gone outside for leveling. The streets were bustling with people, many of whom were visiting Jaden's shop, the high-level alchemist, on the corner. All players who exhausted their stock of potions when leveling outside had to replenish their supply at that place. The auction house that sat in the heart of the city teemed with an even greater number of people. On the nearby streets, many players laid out their booths, and once in a while, some eye-catching items would appear. Nie Yan entered the auction house and sold off equipment he no longer had any use for. He also continued buying all available black phenol formulas, black phenol, and the ingredients required. He left nothing unbought. After the opening of the new instance tomorrow, many guilds would go and spearhead the investigation. They would discover, to their amazement, that all traces of the low-priced and relatively unknown black phenol had vanished. Alchemists would occasionally produce several bottles of black phenol, but they'd be bought before one even had time to blink. As for the black phenol Nie Yan collected, they became commodities worth being stockpiled. He could starve the marketplace and slowly rid himself of the black phenol and black phenol formulas bit by bit, thus inflating the prices. The larger the development into the new instance, the greater the player's need for black phenol, and the easier the prices would rise. He could start by first selling black phenol and its ingredients, then he'd sell the formula at the later stages. He could gather a large sum of wealth with a method like this. Other investment options would be considered only after earning the money, since he had spent quite a sum purchasing black phenol. As usual, Nie Yan went over to several small towns to collect bat teeth. He sold them off and earned 30 or so silver coins. He even bought most of the bat teeth on the marketplace, and he was now waiting for players to continue grinding. When they came by more bat teeth, he would return. However, Nie Yan felt slightly puzzled because he hadn't even bought a single set of bat teeth at Link. Odd, as it was one of the larger sources of bat teeth. Mr. Cade, these are the bat teeth you asked for. Sir Nie Yan, Nirvana Flame, I am grateful for your assistance. After Nie Yan's influence in Kalor had been raised, the NPC started using honorifics with him. It was evident as Cade was much more amiable. He came out of Cade's store, the high-level blacksmith. Nie Yan raised his head and saw a paladin with silver armor entering with a hammer in his hand. This person seemed a bit over 30 years old. He was very tall and a bit fat. He had quite a unique appearance. The paladin looked at Nie Yan with a cautious gaze. They brushed past each other before the paladin walked into blacksmith Cade's store and went to chat with him. Nie Yan recalled this person. He was the paladin who discovered the blacksmith quest in his past life, the person who made over 10 gold coins. The person who truly discovered this bat teeth quest had arrived, increasing the total number who knew of this money-making method to 2. If there were 2 people simultaneously collecting bat teeth, one would raise the prices to increase competition. The opposing side would raise the prices as well, and it would turn into a repeated back-and-forth situation until the profits became marginal. The players would also begin to suspect whether the bat teeth held special uses and thus start holding onto them. Last time, there was a thief that followed Nie Yan, and now, there were a total of 2 players buying bat teeth for high prices. That would elicit more suspicion, and soon, someone would follow that paladin and blacksmith Cade would be revealed. I won't be making much profit off this quest any longer. But to Nie Yan, Cade's bat teeth quest was now dispensable. He had already acquired sufficient starting capital, and he also had many other methods of making money. This quest was not a necessity for him. Nie Yan checked his total assets. There were over 60 silver coins in his bag, and there were also large amounts of black phenol, its ingredients, and the formulas, all of which were going to inflate exponentially in value. It was absolutely fine, even if he lost this source of income. Without even realizing it, he arrived at the Alchemist Guild's entrance after finding his way through the crowd. His mind had been wandering about before a vendor disrupted his thoughts. High-level potion ingredients and a swift retreat skill book for thieves. It's a pretty decent skill book. This brother here, would you like to have a look? Yelled a white-robed holy mage. He had laid out a booth at the Alchemist Guild's entrance, and when Nie Yan passed by, his eyes brightened. He decided to draw attention to himself. The holy mage was a shrewd person. With a glimpse, he knew Nie Yan's equipment wasn't common gear, and several of them were quite high quality. This skill book, Swift Retreat, was something good for early-level thieves. However, it went for a rather expensive price. He demanded a silver. Obviously, it was tough to find a buyer for such a costly item. If it were put on the auction, he'd likely find someone, but he would only receive money, and there was even a fee. The reason he chose to set this booth here was because he wanted to trade this skill book for holy mage equipment. His chances were greatly increased while people were converging here to form groups for the new instance. Normal thieves simply couldn't afford to buy such a skill book. As a result, even though he had been yelling for 20 minutes and there were thieves who came up to inquire the prices, they all shook their head as they departed. However, the holy mage couldn't help but call out for Nie Yan since he appeared rather well off. Nie Yan turned his head around and glanced at the holy mage. With an ash-black staff in his hand, he was clad in a white mage robe and seemed to be around 20 years of age. With his sharp judgment, Nie Yan instantly recognized his equipment. The robe he wore was called the Holy Walker, and the ash-black staff was the Wind of the Fallen Moon. Although these weren't the best equipment at this level, they were still rather decent. "You're pretty lucky. Swift Retreat dropped for you," Nie Yan said, faintly smiling. "It was a very useful skill." "Yeah, my luck's always been good. I have a few friends who were grinding for several days at Holy Canyon, yet they haven't even gotten anything good. I, on the other hand, just grinded for 3 hours and this Swift Retreat dropped. Right now, one of these is even more expensive than a silver-grade equipment on the marketplace." Nie Yan's response to the Holy Mage's advertisement immediately triggered this chatterbox. He was like a radio that had been turned on.